welcome to
Well, hello.
SciChat Saturday in that crazy thing we call Saturdays with science and
Saturdays.
drinks and this time some crazy end of the world language. Um, on
I
top of
love
it,
language games.
yeah, well, this is the live show once a month where we get into some informal and very fun conversations on issues going on in science and intersecting science with other things going on in the world as it were. Again, I'm not alone like I was last week. No, I wasn't last week. No, I wasn't alone.
You're
Wow,
never
I'm
alone.
batting 1,000. This is a good start this morning. But so today I am joined by Kieran White, the founder of Woke Screen and the host of the Crowdsource podcast, which will be on later today. So if you're watching right now, you should go watch. And if you are watching right now, thank you very much. We appreciate it. If you're watching on the replay, thank you very much. Also, we appreciate that too. And so, welcome back, Kieran.
Well, thank you for having me back. I don't usually get invited back places, but I guess I was a good boy last time, so I'll take that as a good thing.
I feel like I have to be on my best behavior with manners because I have an Englishman present.
Hey.
Okay, so I invited Kieran back because language is definitely some of his expertise, being the journalism background or photojournalism background, more appropriately, but just general focusing on language. And because I think I've mentioned it a few times other places that, for whatever reason, peer-reviewed journals are now getting into this notion of inclusivity style guides. They don't all come under that name, but same kind of tangent. So, I think a good place to start would be like for those who are unfamiliar, what the heck is a style guide to begin with?
Well, what is a style guide? Well, I have here as a hand little prop this little baby. Now, this thing, you may be aware of it if you're a writer, if you're a blogger, if you're a, any kind of freelancer or things like that. The AP Style Guide is basically your Bible when it comes to writing, and it tells you how to format stuff properly, the kind of the norms, the journalistic norms within that framework of styling. And what it does is, for example, one of the things that I've covered is this whole idea of the capitalization of black. So, for example, during the George Floyd, even that was his sister, Joy Floyd, but George Floyd, all of that big debacle over the Summer of Love. What ended up happening was they changed their guidance on the capitalization of black. And what they've done is they prefaced it by saying that black capitalized indicates a collective identity, or as Thomas Sowell would call it, the authentic black, which is why, little tangent, but is why anyone that is black, that is called white or anything like that, anytime they exceed the rigid boundaries of what it is to be black, they are no longer black because they have broken out of that very rigid mold. But it goes on to explain a lot of things about how you should write. For example, if you're going to write dollar in a bit of text, do you put the symbol or do you write dollar as a word? And that book will tell you. Now, the BBC, the Guardian in the UK, all of these different outlets, some of them do have their own style guide, but the AP Style Guide is usually the default. Now, what we're going to be talking about today is obviously the more scientific fields that require their own specialist style guides, because there's a lot more specialist language in there. But all's to say is they are a lot of fun. And but they can, if you understand what they are, they can really tell you, and they're very good for gauging exactly what the ideological narrative is with the bit of text you're going to be reading. As soon as you read an article and the word black is capitalized, you know what they're talking about and way they're framing it. Now, I must note, just a little footnote to end this little explainer off. I must say, though, that as much as I loathe what my colleagues do to a large extent, it's very important to be a bit nuanced about this and understand that the style guide itself usually only comes into play during the editing process. And a journalist, so if because I'm a one-man band with everything, I have to be my own sub, I have to be my own commissioning editor, I have to be everything, right? But when you're working at, say, the New York Times or something, the publication everyone loves to hate, but you've got to understand the way it works. A journalist will have an understanding of how they're meant to style their work. They don't just verbally diarrhea it out onto a Word document and send it off and let it be someone else's problem. They'll have an idea. However, it has to go to an editor or a sub editor or a substantive editor, as it's called, to basically either cut lots of bits out of it or make sure it adheres to the framework. So all that's to say is that just because a journalist has got his name on it doesn't mean that that journalist has signed off on all of those language choices. It is done higher up at the point just before publication. So that was a long waffle, but that was, I think, a good understanding of exactly what it is and what it's for.
Yeah, and it is different, just a little bit, at least with the peer reviewed journals, because of course you have the whole thing where you're just doing peer review for the content part of it first, and oftentimes any of the kind of little style things aren't what come up there. They come up afterwards, after your article's actually been accepted, where then they go in and say, do you want do, do you deliberately make the choice to make it this way, or is the site, are the citations in the correct format, and do you have appropriate formulas written correctly, and all those kinds of things, proper formatting for journals. Mostly with the style guides traditionally in peer review, it's just been formatting. It's not been about narrative
Yeah.
necessarily, or adjusting the narrative to be inclusive, which I can see all sorts of potential problems with doing that in journalism, let alone starting to do that in like a chemistry journal, which is which is for background context, is the first place I came across this inclusivity style guide thing in academia, in the scholarly communications, was the American fucking Chemical Society, of all fucking places. Pardon my language.
I honestly, I think half the time they're on a lot of chemicals when they write this guff.
I never thought, because this is a side tangent, but I never thought for some of the culture related stuff that's going on right now that in STEM it would be chemistry where this stuff would appear first.
Right, right. Especially because I think there's a lot more applicable areas that could be actually used a
Yeah.
lot more efficiently than chemistry. Physics or biology being the two that spring to mind, but chemistry, all right, bit of a weird Trojan horse, but I guess you work with what you've got.
Indeed, yeah. So, but the whole language thing becomes important when we start considering things like I'm sorry to mention it right up front, but but the CDC's guidance on chest feeding, which is fundamentally just anti-scientific altogether. So it's no wonder. Oh, just for kicks and giggles, hold on a second.
I can't.
I know you can't, but it's going to happen anyway.
That's what I'm here for.
Yep, there it is. There it is. Can transgender patients who have had breast surgery breastfeed or chest feed their infants? Um, so what I don't have the study here in front of me, but what the CDC is ignoring is, of course, actually no, men can't breastfeed, and the thing that seems to be milk when you go to breastfeed a child is usually loaded with a whole bunch of chemical things, which pregnant women are told never to eat and drink a whole lot of. Well, thank you, Nat Hat. Welcome. Um,
Hello.
we appreciate you. Thank you for coming. Um,
Right time as well, just about the chest feeding breast milk. So you're coming right at the perfect time.
but there's actually been studies about this. I got to pull it up and show it on the channel just once. But this goes to the language thing, just because we're changing the language from breastfeed to chest feed. But like that so-called milk from, because I don't know of any other word to describe it aside from like discharge or something like that.
Oh, oh, oh,
Maybe you should be glad you haven't had breakfast.
oh my God, is there a set? I've got a soundboard here and I accidentally removed the censor button just before this stream. Oh, good lordy. Carry on.
But oh goodness. The discharge when you're chest feeding or breastfeeding. I'm gonna say breastfeeding, damn it, even though they don't have breasts. Um,
I
it's
mean,
been
to be
shown,
fair, at
like,
this
been
point, I
shown to
do.
cause
So
heart problems in infants. It's
yeah.
actually been shown to cause heart problems in infants, so what the hell, man? Um,
I
but
mean, the thing is you have no idea. Well, I guess we probably do have an idea. I'm sure there's studies that say exactly what the chemical makeup is of those. God, these words, liquids, ugh,
you gotta pick a word that's
excretions.
not milk because it's not breast milk.
It's not even vegan, so no one even buy it either. It's like it hasn't even got a market at
Yeah.
all for this stuff. Oi, oi, oi. Um, so the thing is I wonder what's in there. It's probably an absolute mix of terrible hormones that probably aren't doing any good to the developing infant. In addition to that, I mean, I shan't say too much because I don't want to get you told off. But certain things were shown to, move into those excretions and then into the child.
Yep.
Now, I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, a lot of people are on SSRIs and other kind of stabilizing medications. Me
Yep.
personally, I'm not an advocate for them. I think in very serious situations, they're possibly a last resort. But I do think a lot of depression is situational. Unless you have actual chemical imbalance, you shouldn't have them. But that's by the by. Point being is that if a person, how do I put it? If a person is thinking that they can breastfeed when they're a biological male, I wouldn't be surprised, and I'm generalizing here, I understand this, but I wouldn't be surprised if they have been somewhat pharmaceuticalized to an extent and probably been on a lot of other concoctions of medications, be it puberty blockers, be hormone replacement stuff. All to say is that is all going in a neat form into that developing child.
Yeah.
And they're probably getting malnutrition as well because they haven't even got the building blocks of what they need in that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I would agree. It's probably a malnutrition thing for sure. But I mean, your point is taken because a lot of pregnant women are told not to have alcohol or drugs or certain
Right,
things like that while they're pregnant and while they're breastfeeding because that will be passed on to the child. So,
right.
but the reason I bring this up is because things like this show up because of course, the push for inclusive language at the expense of at the expense of being truthful. And of course, CDC has their own kind of inclusive communication principles. You find these under I have not found them consistently named. Like so inclusivity style guide just happened to be an easy name for it when I was looking
Mm.
at it. But CDC has their own sort of mess. And I gotta say, they wonder why there's a lack of trust.
Yeah, I mean but this is the thing though. I mean they intentionally wrap it up in nonsensical language so that it's not easily found, or when you're glancing very quickly, you have to actually ponder it for a while, and not many people have the time to do that.
hmm But like, let's see here. Where do we have a good one here? Maybe the can I? Oh, here we go. Health equity guiding principles for inclusive communication.
Has he got a robo leg, or is that my eyes?
What now?
Has he got a go-go gadget leg, or is that my eyes?
Yeah, no, he's an amputee.
Oh yes, go-go gadget leg.
But yeah, there's a lot of these kinds of things like oh wow, what is this? Hold on. Long-standing systemic and social health inequities have put population groups at risk of getting sick, having overall poor health, and having worse outcomes. Avoid perpetuating health inequities in communication by Do you see the assumption made here?
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
our standard favorite assumption, but goodness,
I just,
goodness.
what boggles my mind as well is that, and I kind of like, I do this with films sometimes or marketing plans and things. But it is fun and quite funny to think, and also worrying, that this guide probably went through months of sort of negotiation, several board meetings, probably angry emails back and forth to come up with this, which is probably the best of a shit ton of bad decisions they made and plans. But this is what they came out with.
Health equity is intersectional. Diversity exists within and across communities and can be defined by several factors.
And,
Remember,
and here's the other thing that they do as well is they're not necessarily incorrect in their initial premise with things, right? There are certain things that do, and I'm not going to shy away from using language that they've co-opted, but there are certain things that do intersect. So, for example, being on a low socioeconomic class will probably correlate with certain other things. But they do it and they frame it and wrap it up into these new things. They repurpose for the sake of repurposing.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, and you're right. The socioeconomic status generally, if you're a little bit more poor, you have difficulty maintaining good health, and that is
I mean, the majority of kind of like in the UK, there was this big campaign where, I mean, it made me feel a bit queasy, no pun intended. But the government going round and like testing all of these. I think they were giving. I might not be correct here, but I think I heard that they were doing all these testings on low income sort of neighborhoods and things like this for cancers due to smoking, and putting them on these tests and things, which made me feel a bit odd. But the point being is that yes, if you're in a lower socioeconomic group, you're more likely to smoke, therefore you're more likely to have higher rates of lung cancer in those communities. So there is intersections between certain factors, but
yeah,
again, it's wrapping it all up around these things, and they never get to the nub of exactly the root cause. It's just the effect is enough. A bit like when they say Black Lives Matter, they say, X amount of people arrested are from a certain demographic, and it's like, well, they might be correct with that, then they ascribe it to something else, like, you got me, you got me, you got me, oh, you've lost me.
yeah, yeah.
It's
They
a
they
shame.
take they take something that is probably an observable empirical thing, and then just go off in a direction where it's just like, nope, that makes absolutely no sense.
Right, it's like the prison stats as well. When they say X amount of people in prison are of a certain demographic, but then they go and they lead you right up to the point where they're going to give you the hard facts of why that is, and then they cop out and go racism. And it's like, come on, guys! Like, if you really want unity around this, then we can look at the reason why people are overrepresented in health statistics, or race violence statistics, or prison statistics. But if you're going to just wrap it up very quickly in a branding term of racism and stuff, you don't. And that's where the grifting of the activist comes in.
Oh yeah, definitely. Definitely. But all of this is really just to set the stage because I'm
Oh, yeah, it gets worse.
wow, okay. But part of the reason I wanted to set the stage with this is because I mean these kinds of things, this inclusive thing, and of course developing inclusive communications. Oh, I wonder what this is. But when developing public, consider the following: build a diverse workforce through levels, including leadership positions. Consider the benefits of hiring people from communities you serve, including those who are disproportionately affected and who look and sound. Isn't that just? I'm sorry. I would be
That's a
pretty
robot.
pretty upset to be hired for just looking and sounding like people in a community they want to target. I'd be pretty aggravated with that.
At this point, like, I wouldn't be surprised when they say sound. I wouldn't even be surprised if they mean tone of voice as well. And the only way to correctly address this is just employ robots,
Hmm.
which then they'll be moaning about as well, quite rightfully, because there'll be no jobs for them.
Yeah.
You know, they might bitch a little less, but still.
Yeah, but part of the reason, I mean, the reason for setting the stage with all this stuff with CDC is basically like all this inclusivity communications kind of stuff does trickle its way into policy, but it sure as heck doesn't start there.
Oh no,
Um,
that's when it gets public attention.
yeah,
No one looks actually at the root cause.
Oh yeah, definitely. But let's see here.
I must say, though, I am getting a little bit of PTSD looking at the CDC website after
No,
looking.
we will go away from the CDC website.
I looked at it for every single day for about nearly 4 years, checking to see when they updated their travel ban. So I'm getting a little bit jarred looking at their kind of pale blue, greenish tones.
Yeah, I'm just checking something because I got a couple of I can see what iterations are in YouTube, and I'm wondering how much of a lag that I have because because I have the YouTube thing here is showing me it's actually still on the fact sheet, so it's like 10 seconds behind or something like
Oh,
that. It's
that's
actually pretty
interesting.
interesting lag. Although on my phone, it's not. It's in about the right place. So I don't know who's seeing what at this point. So we're just gonna run with whatever we got.
Well, you've got to remember, though, you've got to remember that the whole stream will be in sync. So it's not like us talking about something and the screen is out of date. It'll be the whole stream.
Yeah, no, I'm just looking at it because I'm seeing like I know what I'm seeing here. I'm seeing here matches what I'm seeing here, but not what I'm seeing there. So I don't know what's going
When I do it on Rumble, sometimes there's a lack of sync as well, and I think it is the latency
on.
as well. You can do really short latency, and it's a little bit less quality, or you can do a little bit less, and it's a bit better quality.
Okay, well, we'll mess around with that. But anyway, we'll alleviate your PTSD symptoms and go away from the CDC because I found this one, which I just love. The
Is this alleviating my PTSD? Is this your answer to alleviating?
I would hope it would because I mean it's at least it's not the CDC.
I guess so. I guess so.
It's called C4 disc, which makes no bloody sense as an acronym.
That sounds like the disc that's wrong in my back. Jeez. Now I've got even more PTSD. What are you doing to me today, Adrian?
I'm trying to build your resilience so you will be a stronger person.
Look, as long as we're inclusive, that's all that matters.
Oh goodness, but yeah, the reason this comes up, the reason this came up is that it is relatively recent. It was actually just published in October, because they created their own guidelines on inclusive language and images and scholarly communications. And so, scholarly communications being, our academic communications of journals and reports and all that lovely crazy jazz that predates all the journalism stuff and eventually gets into journalism as we talked about in the other SciChat Saturday on Studies Say Shit.
Yeah, yeah, a lot.
But the reason I ended up looking at this one is because they didn't just, and we'll get into this, they didn't just create their own. They actually cited a tremendous number of others, including an inclusivity style guide from the American Medical Association, the American Psychological Association, of course, got one from the American Chemical Society. So there's some interesting things for us to have fun with. And, part of the stream is to point this out, but part of the stream is just to make fun of it. So,
Adrian's got a funny definition of fun, but I'm here for it. What do they say about the image? Like, is that literally images, like using?
Yeah, yeah, they do have a whole separate. They have a whole thing on images. They have a whole thing about how to talk about race. They have a whole thing about how to talk about age, which is funny because they get into adultism, which I don't know if you know what adultism is, but adultism is apparently discriminating against children and preferring adults.
I'm sorry, but that is straight out of Foucault's writing. That's what it feels like.
That's what it is. But so let's see. This isn't about real quick. Coalition for Diversity and Inclusion in Scholarly Communications was founded by 10 trade and professional associations that represent organizations and individuals working in scholarly communications. The coalition was formed to discuss and address issues of inclusion and diversity within our industry. A number of surveys in recent years have shed light on the lack of diversity in scholarly communications, from issues of gender equality. You notice that do you notice this thing that they're, mix matching equality and equity now? Like starting to use them interchangeably?
Yeah, I think, I don't know, I might have to do a little bit of reading around that, because I'm wondering if they have somehow made a clear split of exactly what it is, and as to whether the ideal form is equity, but they acknowledge that equality is the current state. The other thing I wonder as well is whether they're also putting this in here to appease people that are picking up now that equity means something very different.
Hmm. I don't honestly know how recently this site was created. I think it was last year, but we shall see.
I'm going to have a look in the, while you're reading that, I'm going to look in the AP style guide to see if equity and equality are in there and what it says
Ooh,
about it.
yes, please tell us. This would be nice comparisons. To the noticeable lack of ethnic diversity in our workforce, there is increasing awareness that, as an industry, we are not a model of inclusivity. Publishing is truly a global enterprise, yet that diversity is not reflected in our collective demographics. Representatives from the 10 founding organizations first met in Boston, Massachusetts at the Society for Scholarly Publishing annual meeting in June of 2017 to discuss our shared interests in addressing these challenges and to share information about current initiatives to tackle. What a heck of a sentence. You'd think they would proofread and edit their own damn sentence. Um, and to
One would think.
you're the publishers, guys. Come on. To share information about current initiatives to tackle the lack of diversity and inclusion within the industry. I want to know what they mean by the lack of, to be honest. We agreed to continue our discussions and collaborate on possible projects, starting with a joint statement of principles. Working collectively, we can combine our resources and have a greater impact. During the initial meeting, we identified a number of areas to focus on. These include developing a joint statement of principles, conducting market research, providing training resources, best practices, toolkits, and documentation for our collective memberships, and establishing outreach programs, curricula, events, and publications. Representatives from the coalition now meet monthly and have started to implement some of these initiatives. We welcome other scholarly communications organizations to join us. So these are the guys who do all the publishing of those peer-reviewed articles. So it's like
Yeah,
Elsevier and Springer and those kinds of things.
yeah, yeah.
Oh boy. But
I found, by the way, I found it in the style guide here, and it reads it reads equality, equity, but it only lists it for financials. So it says equity when used in a financial sense. Equity means the value of property beyond the amount that is owed on it, and it only gives those things. But when you go to equitable, it says C equal. So if I go to equal, um, it says an adjective without comparative forms. When people speak of more equal distribution of wealth, what is meant is more. Oh, sorry. What is meant is more equitable.
so they're basically equating equality and equity.
Yeah. So equal, an adjective without comparative forms. When people speak of a more
What the
equal,
hell did wait, what the hell does that even mean? An adjective without comparative forms? What the hell does that even mean?
I'm guessing that there is no comparable formations of that word. So I don't know, but it says when people speak of a more equal distribution of wealth, what is meant is more equitable. Yeah. So that's what they say. I mean, it says a whole lot of nothing, really. And I wonder
Well, the
whether
only
it's
thing it says to me
unintentional.
is that they're treating equality and equity as being the same thing.
Yeah, I might have to have a look because I mean, this is the style guide from 2020 to 2022. I haven't got the latest version, usually because it's only a couple of minor changes, but I may have to get the newer version to have a look if whether they've updated that further.
Mm. But yeah, no, the other thing is the C4 disc has their mission and values, which I'm sure some of these look familiar to our social justice minded friends of critical social justice. Although I will tell you what's funny is I clicked on this before. That link is broken.
Oh, is it?
Their joint statement of principles is like
Interesting. I wonder whether there's a backup on the way back.
it may exist on the Wayback Machine. I don't know, but
Drop the page link in the private chat, and while you're going through, I'll have a little quick look. Mm-mm-mm.
but yeah. So this is the interesting group in question that has created. Here it is. Share this tab instead. has created this thing. The guidelines on inclusive language and images in scholarly communication.
Can I just ask as well, why are the front covers of these things always very weirdly abstract? Like there's some
I
substance.
mean, it's like the faceless, the faceless diversity things. It's like everybody has no eyes or mouth or anything like that, and it's just
Yeah, it's odd. It's odd because there's a certain spontaneity about that kind of art that's unique, but it's also very uniform because they all use it.
oh yeah. Does it? Oh, well, that's the introduction. Okay, yeah. Let me go back. But so yeah, there's a whole collection of language guidelines and image guidelines for these different chapters and resources and what have you. It's actually under a Creative Commons license, so you could actually go have some go have
Mhm.
some fun with it if you like.
I also find it fascinating that the email for the publisher is actually a Gmail address.
Well, I think that's because the publisher for this is not a publishing company, but it's this new group that was formed by a bunch of organizations. So I
I know, but
don't
not
know
to
that they
sound
want to have it specifically with like Elsevier or something like that.
no, but I mean not to sound technical or anything, but the fact that you've got a website, you would have an email. Like it's very, I don't know, it's just very odd to have a Gmail.
Okay. Well, no,
I don't know. That's a weird technical note, but it was just something that I always find weird when I see any companies or any kind of presence with a
sure.
Gmail.
But yeah, I mean, there's the other Gmail right here. There's lots of Gmails actually. Now that I think of it, now that you pointed out to me.
Is that a way of them doing things and circumventing any kind of regulation by doing things in a private capacity in a way?
Um,
And maybe they're not privy to being FOIA'd?
well, I think if they're publishers, they're generally not privy to it, and they're not privy to FOIA
Oh, of
anyway.
course, they're not part of yes,
Yeah,
yeah.
they're not government, but this could be a way for the group to not get caught up in their respective agencies' conflict of interest
Yeah.
policies. Because I think each publisher would have its own conflict of interest policy. Actually, I'm really curious right now, so hold on a second. Elsevier. I'm curious. That's not what I wanted.
I think I've got the joint statement of principles.
Oh, you found it?
Yeah, let me
Do you want to try and share it? Because I'm curious to look up if Elsevier has their own inclusivity style guide.
it's up to you, or I've just put it in the private chat.
Okay, well let me grab it. Copy link.
I think this is what we were looking for.
Let me see here. Yeah, no, it's the right logo and everything.
Yeah, so this is
Although I don't know why I have a shopping cart thing in here too at the same time.
no, I don't understand that either. I think it's I don't know. It's odd because this screen capture is from March 8th, 2023. So it looks like it's recently that it was taken down.
That's fascinating by itself. Hold on, let me share this.
In fact,
Um,
that is the last screen capture.
yeah, courtesy of the Wayback Machine.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see their joint statement of principles. The future of scholarly communications will be positively impacted by attracting and retaining a pool of highly talented and creative individuals from diverse and or historically excluded background who possess a wide range of skill sets and viewpoints. It's the thing that's always bothered me with the DEI stuff is diversity is pretty much assuming that you have difference of opinion just because you look different.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Oh goodness. No citations for any of these things, but anyway. Definitions. Oh, hey, they're actually nice enough to provide some kind of definitions for all of their terms. Look at that.
Yeah, this is why I think it was maybe pulled.
Refers to composition of a group of people from any number of backgrounds, identities, innate and selected.
Oh, by the way, there is citations, but it's very easy to overlook them because they're not linked, but the resources are down the bottom.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So if you look in the second paragraph,
Right.
yeah, it's
I
in
see
there.
what you're saying. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Equity, ensures that all individuals are provided the resources and support they need to access opportunities available to their peers. Oh boy. In principle and practice, collectively, C4 DISC member and partner organizations value and seek accessibility, diversity, equitable, and inclusive practices. Within the scholarly communication ecosystem, our goal is to promote involvement, innovation, and expanded access to leadership opportunities to maximize engagement across identity groups and professional levels. Identity groups include, but are not limited to. Good grief, man.
Not limited. It's not exhaustive. They just include these.
Collectively, we will provide leadership and commit time and resources to accomplish these objectives while what objectives? I don't remember reading an objective before that.
No, I mean, there is an argument that maybe it's something to do with the way it's archived. They might have missed something.
Yeah, possible.
But the chances are it's probably them.
Yeah. We are committed to eliminating barriers to participation, extending equitable opportunities across all stakeholders. That is bad thing. I would just say to all stakeholders, not across all stakeholders. That's just stupid.
By the way, it is them that hasn't put it in there because I'm scrubbing back through the archive and it's not included at all.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know.
Yeah.
Creating or maintaining an environment that respects diverse traditions, heritages, and promoting diversity in all staff and volunteer audiences, including full participation in programs, raising awareness about career opportunities, supporting our community in achieving diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility within their organizations. Oh boy. Oh, McKinsey! Look at that.
Ah, lovely.
Notice of NIH's interest in diversity. Oh, that's lovely. Always watch out for the government things.
Yeah, it's got the grant link down below it.
Grants.gov. Updated October 2021. So they had this October 2021. So I don't know what happened that they got rid of it.
And it was updated October 2021. So it would be interesting. I'm going to have a look and see if I can have a look what it looked like before that.
I don't think all these links were there in the other site either. Hold on a sec. This is some live sleuthing.
Oh, you know what's interesting is that the version that predates the update, it only had definitions for diversity and inclusion.
Interesting. So this has changed and been stripped around a fair bit.
Yeah, I also think that the identity groups were also limited in their scope. Yeah, fascinating.
Oh yeah, but when you see anti-racism toolkit for allies show up on the page, it always makes me wonder. Anti-racism toolkit for anti-racism toolkit, yeah. So here you go. Is your scholarly publishers are, shall we say, very woke, eh? Why the heck did I just channel Canada?
I don't know. I wasn't going to say anything, but yes. Okay.
But anyway, that's not what we came to talk about. So I'm going to go back to the other thing. But there's obviously a lot of stuff here that I didn't know about because, I didn't get the chance to go all the way through it. So,
and the thing is this is just a grain of sand of everything that's going on, which is the madness.
Oh yeah, definitely. I'm going to have to stop looking at the YouTube one because now it looks like it's 2 minutes behind.
Yeah, that's always a good thing. Don't look at it. Turn
that off. Okay, switch it this way. But yeah, so this whole thing, this whole book you put out by this group has guidelines for just about anything. So any particular place you want to go first? And you're hating that you came on this stream right now. You're giving me something there.
You know what I'm doing is I'm currently looking at a little text comparison. So I've pasted in what was what was pasted into the. I tell you what, let me share my screen.
Yeah, go for it.
Hang on, how do I share my screen? Presents, share screen, share screen. Here we go.
Oh,
So,
goodness.
so let me show you. This is a really good little tool. So what you do is you paste in the original text and then you paste in the new text and it'll show you the differences. So it's showing that acknowledgements. So in the original one, predating 2021, it was scholarly communications requires creativity in a wide range of skill sets and viewpoints. The future of scholarly communications would be positively impacted by attracting and retaining a pool of highly talented and creative professionals from diverse backgrounds and with a wide range of skills sets and viewpoints. So that was removed, and this was placed instead. The future of scholarly communications will possibly impacted by attracting and retaining a pool of highly talented and creative professionals with diverse and or historically excluded backgrounds. So fascinating, isn't it? It doesn't. This was not in this bit, and then it goes into this whole expansion about all of this stuff. So it definitely tells me that they really lent into it a lot more when past the 2021. And you see here that they have removed or they've added these ones.
Mm.
So all's that to say, I won't delve into it too much, but all's that to say is that I wouldn't be surprised that the George Floyd thing, like the pressure that was put on everyone else, they updated things to be a lot more compliant with the, the activist zeitgeist.
Right. Well, that's fun.
Yeah. little footnote there for you. But yeah.
So, all right. So, can I kick you off?
Yeah. Kick. There we go. Oh gosh.
So you can have your pick first, of where you would like to go, unless you'd like to have a brief introduction to what the heck they're doing before we go into.
Yeah, let's do an introduction. Let's prime people before we scare them.
What is inclusive language according to the Linguistic Society of America? Which I'm sure John McWhorter has something to say about that because he is part of the Linguistic Society. Inclusive language acknowledges diversity, conveys respect to all people, is sensitive to differences, and promotes equal opportunities.
I mean, I'm all on board with that.
Yeah, that's something that anybody would be all on board with.
Right. I mean, I know I'm a hardliner, and I say
in with a nice carrot, and then they beat you over the head with a stick.
Exactly. It's like I'm definitely a hardliner. I don't believe people deserve respect; they have to earn it. But I can meet on a bit here and say convey respect to. Okay, fair enough. I think you should convey humanity, but I'm happy to meet here. Is sensitive to differences. Yeah, like they should be sensitive to my viewpoint. And promotes equal opportunity. Equal opportunity is great. It's not real, but it's great, and that should be what we're striving for. But anyway, carry on.
There we go. Let's blow this up a little bit so it's a little easier to read. But yeah, this is published on October 20th, 2022. So this isn't even a year old yet.
But this is key because this is also post the changes that were seen on this. So we can see that with the last screen that I shared, we can tell that there was something very dramatically different with the navigation they were going, and they really doubled down on it. Because obviously that's the only thing that correlates with a lot of this stuff. The AP style guide, they updated their meaning of black after the George Floyd and said that they were doing it in response. So that's the reason I'm guessing that they did make all those changes. So now we're reading this is 2022. This is post that they have gone down this logical route. So it'd be interesting to see.
Right. While each section of this part of the guidelines delves into a specific topic, there are several overarching ideas to keep in mind. Framing. First, consider how the narrative is framed. The Frameworks Institute. Do you have any idea what that is? Because I don't.
Basically, probably a fraudulent embezzlement that is profiting allegedly. My opinion. Don't sue us. My opinion.
Framework Institute defines framing as the choices we make in what we say and how we say it, including what we emphasize, how and what we explain, and what we leave unsaid.
Basically, Department of Censorship. Let's just, yeah.
Exactly. Who is telling the story? From what perspective is the situation viewed? It is easy for authors to write from their own perspective and ethnocentric point of view simply because this is how they naturally see the world. Other times, the point of view that of whatever group is considered default, whatever the hell that means, or has or has power in society. Again, this is all about power. This is you're getting your postmodernism taste right here, right?
Yeah, you're getting your Foucauldian,
Right.
approach,
One
which is
example
also
of this
then
is
also
Yeah.
with the language stuff is all Derrida.
Yeah.
That's where that all comes from.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is a postmodern soup of diatribe.
Yeah. One example of this is Eurocentrism or Western bias. So ethnocentrism, the attitude that one's own group, ethnicity, or nationality is superior to others.
No, that's ethno supremacy.
Exactly.
Ethnocentrism should be that you are that it basically is the center of what informs your perspective.
Yeah.
It's kind of in the root word, ethnocentrism. Their definition there is supremacy.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
And
mean,
then they go to this Eurocentrism, which is the tendency to interpret the world in terms of European or Anglo American values and experiences.
that makes a lot more sense.
But yeah, then that one does actually, at least in terms of the way they're defining it. But
When when these people are waxing lyrical about white supremacy, white supremacy, white supremacy, why don't they call that what it is of racial supremacy? It's
no, because I mean, this is the thing. The postmodern thing is to only look at one group as bad, not.
yeah, and redefine words. Look at the power structure to reassert the power.
hmm It is common for the default point of view to be centered on so-called Western countries like the US, UK, and other predominantly white higher income countries. Somehow I don't think so lately. As
No,
discussed in the geopolitics session, one must consider if this is the most important appropriate framing for the text, particularly if the context is international or the subject of the text exists outside the default group.
that I mean, the in its essence, there's nothing wrong with that. In the fact that if you are talking about a story about you know kind of a story within China and different ethnic heritage within there, you wouldn't be doing it from the point of view of a Western take on that. You would be looking at it specific, like that's just common practice.
Yeah,
But the way that they do white and the way that they say higher income, that hasn't got any implication on the story at all, nor should it,
yeah,
unless you are writing in that way.
yeah. Yeah. Has anyone been left out? Whether intentional or not, it's possible for the dominant voice or perspective to silence those who are not included. For example, Usha Lee McFarling notes that health equity tourism is growing, where researchers with little or no background or training in health equity researchers, often white and already well funded, are rushing in to scoop up grants and publish papers without including or citing Black or Brown researchers whose work already exists in the field. Another example is the book Bad and Bougie, something wrong with that, toward a
That's a
travel
band name.
theology, which was written by a white woman. What? Why is that a problem? The, bo- the book
You
was
notice
pulled
as
back from
well,
publication due to accusations of cultural appropriation and problematic portrayal of the very culture it focused on, Black women in hip hop.
but you notice as well that white is capitalized
Yeah.
and black is capitalized. Now, what's interesting about that, I'll try not and because there's just so much to unpack with every paragraph here. But what's fascinating is that generally speaking, white is never capitalized. I mean, when it comes to talking about someone's skin color or the color itself, white or black and colors generally are never capitalized. But when it comes to black, I've explained why that is because it actually denotes an identity group. Now, I find it interesting that white is because because when it came to the AP, and they were talking about the process they went through of, whether they were going to capitalize black or not. And when they came to that decision, they also made it very clear that they weren't going to capitalize white. And if I find it here, in my article that I wrote about it, it states the quote that was given by the it says here, as expected in July 2020, the AP announced that it would not capitalize the word white in its news articles, following its decision last month to capitalize black in context of race and culture. The AP said that white people in general have much less shared history and culture and don't have the experience of being discriminated against because of their skin color.
Well, that's a lie, but
Right. So that was what they ended up saying with that. So I do find it interesting that they have now used white here, because the general premise is white capitalized is the same practice as black capitalized. It's meant to be a set of values, which is odd.
right. So yeah, maybe that's what they're saying here is like a certain set of values.
Yeah, they could
From
be
the
using it in reverse by saying basically it's collective guilt. It's white, not because she's white as an individual, but by white people.
right.
But they couldn't say it was written by white people. That's a white woman, but she's an extension of the collective guilt.
Let's see. Keep the status quo and default groups in mind when ordering information and presenting lists. It is common to present statistics or numbers in order from smallest to largest to smallest, or vice versa. However, this can sometimes be problematic. We love that word, as it may result in the dominant power group always being listed first. For example, in countries like the US, documenting statistics of population will usually result in white being listed first, reinforcing the idea that white is the default or normal race in that country. It may also imply that the group is the intended audience. Swabish. Why the heck did I have that there? To to avoid this, the information might be ordered randomly or in alphabetical order. You know how that's a funky assumption that they make, that just because white happens to be first because of the numerics of the situation and analysis. Why do you presume that that reinforces the default being white is normal? This is the thing that they do. We don't do that. I don't think you and I do that at all.
No, right, and not only that, but you notice how it's all relative, right? Because again, like if we were to look at prison stats or stuff like that, or certain things where black individuals are of a higher count or statistical norm, then if we went, okay, I'm reading this guide here, I'm going to put all the black people first, and then they have to. I'm relying on the reader to press read more to actually see the others. You'd get called out for doing that as well.
Yeah.
It doesn't make any sense. It reminds me of when I was at school and like the teacher would get you to line up in alphabetical order based on surname, and obviously I'd always be at the end with white, and then it's like, because if you ended up inversing it, then I'd be first, happy days, but then the person at first would also be last. Like you can't appease everybody.
No. No. To presume you can please everybody is pretty stupid.
Yeah, and not only that, but 9 times out of 10, just because of the language and things like that, a lot of especially if they've still, well, I'm thinking more in the UK, when a lot of the black individuals here are of African heritage. A lot of them still have their African surnames, and therefore, if you were to do it in alphabetical order, then they use more W's and Z's and things like that. So they would like, it doesn't make sense. You would have to consciously look at the data set and go, what order should we do this to put blacks above other people or any other specific race above everybody? Doesn't make sense. You need a uniform policy.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Alphabetical order
discrimination.
works, but
Yeah.
so let's see. Relevance and specificity. Ask whether the information is relevant to the topic at hand. Does a person's immigration status, race, gender identity, and so on matter in this context? If it does, it is best to be as specific as necessary. Avoid generalizations. Don't say older Asian people if you mean Chinese women over the age of 70. Actually, I might agree with that kind of
Oh,
nonsense.
I agree 100% because you know me, I'm very specific language, but it also shoots them in the foot because what do they always preface everything? As a gay man
I
or
know.
as a trans non-binary elephant appreciating starfish lover, I am this. And so that's correct. I mean, yes, if you're looking at statistics, you want to put Chinese women over the age of 70 because older Asian people, what does that mean? What counts as old? Is that anyone 51 and above, or is that anyone 61 above? It's very arbitrary. You need to be precise, especially when it comes to scientific and data analysis.
Exactly. So that's why I don't have
Yeah,
a problem with it. Is you're talking about this is a particular kind of thing that would show up in social science publishing in particular with medicine or psychology or
yeah,
any number of different things, but or even just communications literatures. Like if you're telling me older Asian people, well, what the heck do you mean by that?
right.
Any peer reviewer would be like, oh, well, give me an age range because I don't know what you mean.
Yeah, yeah,
So this is actually not bad here. I don't have a problem with that.
no.
This is annoying though because I don't see the purpose of this. But anyway, in most cases it is preferable to emphasize the person over the attribute. For example, person with cancer instead of cancer patient, man in prison instead of inmate. Emphasizing the attribute can reduce the person to a label and dehumanize them.
So this is really interesting because this comes back to the show that I'd done and the story that I covered a couple of weeks back in London with the inclusivity style guide that was being pushed out by the Mayor of London.
Mm,
And I'm going to sound. Let me know whether you allow me to be a bit controversial
I'll
here.
go for it.
All right. So it's been my whole annoyance as to when we were growing up, the term coloured was a term that was used, and it's now a taboo to say that. But
Yeah.
what's the term that's replaced it? People of color. So I see that as nothing more than a power play. Now, if I was to inhabit the mind of the people that are enforcing this, I could make an argument, in their favor. And I would say that, well, by saying colored, you are putting preference on their attribute over the human being. By saying person of color, you are putting their humanity first. So I can understand it on that point. But I've never understood by saying person of, you've just literally put two words in front of a word that you've rendered offensive. So what does putting two words beforehand make any difference, right? It's a bit like me saying, and I wouldn't ever say the N word, but it's like me saying you can't say the N word with an ER, but by saying an A is completely fine. Or if I turn around and put two words at the front of the N word with the ER, that how completely makes it socially acceptable compared to if I stripped away those two words and just said the word on its own. So what I'm saying is this is all one big power play. And I think that, you know, it doesn't really matter. It's all about exactly what you're trying to convey in the information here. And science shouldn't care about people's feelings or sensitivities with stuff because it's there for the data. It's meant to be as specific as possible because the amount of data that's probably compiled on something, anyone reading it, you don't want fluffy language. You need to be just poof, straight in there with the information you need, not all this fluffy wrapping paper.
Mhm. Let me yeah, I to a degree I agree that science shouldn't care with respect to perhaps the language that's used in an article or what have you. Um
I guess I'll qualify it by saying that I'm not necessarily talking about the article and the literature around it. I'm talking about the actual data itself.
yeah, no, with
Yeah,
respect to the data it doesn't matter necessarily. And that's because, depending upon the styles of the individual journals, because like this is overarching things. Of course, each journal has their own kind of preferred
sure.
style and formatting kind of things, and all those kinds of things. And that's way too much to get into today. But,
Yeah.
but we'd be here for a while because there's a lot of journals.
Oh yeah.
Um, but it's not irrelevant to consider in the analysis and the performance of the experiment. And that's because of things like the Belmont report, which governs the social sciences, in particular, social sciences and medicine, and when you're doing research with human subjects involved. And that's has to do, the reason the Belmont report came about in the 70s was because in the preceding decades, there had been things like the experiments on Jewish people done by the Nazis in the concentration camps, and things like that. So it was, yeah, they were technically science experiments, but they were the most awful, god awful things that you could imagine, and they had no regard for the lives of the people of those different demographic groups. And the same thing could be said for the Tuskegee syphilis experiment
Mhm.
in the US, which prompted a lot of that concern and considerations in the US. So the Belmont report came out in the 70s, and it is the thing that guides the institutional review boards and the medical boards and things like that whenever you're doing research that involves human subjects, and particularly children or prisoners. There was a lot of those kinds of concerns. So, in terms of the representation in the article, in principle, I should agree with you that the language shouldn't matter too much. But where I would put it the other way is that when you're actually doing the experiment, there is to a degree that how you treat people that matters.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I'm talking exclusively about these contortions of person with cancer
Right.
instead of cancer patient.
Yeah.
Um,
And that's just the distinction I wanted to make. We're talking
sure.
specifically about the language, not how people are actually treated. Nobody should be treated unethically in a scientific experiment.
Exactly. I mean, we all had the outrage over the coof and everything. I think we're all on the same page that, yes, it's like, yeah, this is the language that we're talking about.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's like, I believe it was in California that they've now sort of, it was a couple of years back now. But, you can't say homeless person, it's person,
Unhoused person or something like that,
unhoused person. And it's these
or
contortions.
person with a housing problem. I don't know,
Right,
like
a
that.
big housing problem, the problem being they haven't got one. But the point is that it comes back to this whole Derrida idea of the words and the powers within words and the framing of things that this is done. It's not necessary to it's not done to simplify. It's not meant to be, it's done with the guise of inclusivity, but it's not necessary, that's not the primary goal. It's basically doing something, it's reinventing the wheel is
Yeah,
effectively what it is.
yeah. And for their argument, I mean, for their argument here that, cancer patient is dehumanizing and focusing on the attribute, how are you not focusing on the attribute when you're saying person with cancer? I would just I would be just as annoyed if I were worried about the dehumanization part of it here because, well, you're still focusing on the fact that I have cancer rather than me being a person.
Right. Right. And
If
this
you
is the
happen to, I mean, this is adding more words, I'm sorry, but it's just like, I happen to have cancer. Big deal. I'm still a person.
so it should be person who happens to have cancer, but they're all nice and dandy and they're a really lovely person, and that should be the data point. That would be the heading for the table. It's ridiculous. It's like it's the same when people start saying the whole thing of, um, the idea of mental illness. And it's I forget what they now call it. It's you can't call it that. It's something else. And I remember actually a little anecdote here, but I remember so when I was younger, I had epilepsy. I mean, technically, I still have it, but I haven't had an episode, since I was like 12 or 13. But I remember going and doing a sleep study a couple of years back, and they ask you the obligatory thing of, have you got any other conditions? To which I unfurled the scroll, and and I explained to them, and you have to do this big song and dance going, I've got it, it's technically on my records, but I haven't had an episode, so don't worry about it. Anyway, and I explained that my episodes were what they call petit mal, which were, I would have absent seizures. So like when mum would be walking me to school, I'd just like rapidly blink my eyelids and I'd just stop and not realize what's going on around me. And obviously that was concerning because I'd stop in the middle of the road as we were crossing it. Um, but that was all that would happen. I wouldn't have any fits or anything like that. But the point being is when I went there, I remember talking and I said, I had petit mal, and they were like, we don't use that word anymore. It's like, okay. No, it's very offensive. We call them absent seizures now. Well, they called it something else. And then I found out I couldn't call my autism Asperger's anymore because of the connotations with that. Then one of the words I do hate that's new, and I really hate it. I know people like it as a catch-all, fluffy word, but neurodivergent. Oh my god,
Gotta be
no,
inclusive.
no! I have a developmental condition or a mental disorder or whatever you want to call. Just call it what it is. Neurodivergent. I'm sorry,
Let's go
but I
back to George Carlin, soft language.
oh soft, soft. Honestly, it's just it drives me insane. It drives me insane. But yeah, it's the whole people that say you can't say someone's suffering with something.
Yeah.
They're living with, they're not suffering. And I understand that's like a loaded term. They're suffering. Like I don't suffer with my autism. I've never known any different. I wouldn't want to be cured from it. I am fine how I am. Um, but yeah, I mean, I,
Like, I mean, I have some medical related things too, and obviously it is what it is kind of thing. And I had
yeah,
medical conditions growing up. I still have four eyes for crying out loud, and I will have four eyes for the rest of my life.
I need to go and get my four eyes sorted. My other glasses aren't strong enough anymore.
Oh jeez. Oh geez. Well, I may be reduced to two eyes at some point just because one of the conditions you have in the family is macular degeneration. So it may very well be that I go blind in one eye or both eyes
Oh
before
gosh,
the end of my life.
you're gonna
It's
be
a generation too. My grandmother had it, my mother didn't have it, so my sister and I are screwed.
well. Let's hope that, given it's 2023, cyborg eyes will be out by, God forbid, touch wood, that never happens. But we'll come on a live stream and you'll have those glowing red eyes, those Terminator eyes.
That'd be funny. I'm sure there's a way to do that with StreamYard or with some of these things where you can just like fill that in
Add
as a special
filters.
effect. That'd be funny.
Oh, I haven't played
At
around
this
with any
point,
settings
a
yet.
lot of these things are dehumanizing, and it is a question. The treatment, yes, obviously ethical treatment, but the language on the back end. And actually, I don't know if you saw the video I did a while back, but it was on ethics and society review boards, which are being proposed now. So, like institutional review boards focuses on the research and the patients and making sure the research subjects or the people involved in research, or I'm not even going to say that, research subjects, we don't need to go there, are treated ethically during the course of research, and there's no identifying information provided and those kinds of things, making sure they're okay. That's the institutional review board at different universities and institutions. This proposed thing of ethics and society review boards are looking at how the potentially publishable research, you've already written a manuscript at this point, how it may be harmful to marginalized groups. I shit you not. This is an actual thing to basically give editors and journals the power to reject things because it might be harmful. It might be harmful, not that it is, might be harmful to a group. Anna and I were talking about it at one point, and I know I did a video on it, but it's just like, that's a really bad idea. That is legitimizing censorship for the sake of
Yeah,
harm, whatever
I
the
mean,
heck harm means.
it well, I mean, it's a relative term, depends who's wielding it. And and the thing is it also goes back to when monkeypox was running rife, right? We had to change it to mpox, which is a little bit of it sounds like a really bad cover band of Heather Small's M People, you know. Um, and so it's like we had to do that, and then we had to lean into this really weird kind of psychological exercise of believing that everybody was at equal opportunity of getting monkeypox, even though it was coming primarily from very specific demographic, not exclusively, but a very specific demographic. And so we had to do that. We saw this around the coof, the fact that it all had to be given names. We couldn't call it, the Italian strain or the Wuhan strain or
No,
things like that.
it had to be given like alpha, beta, delta, gamma for a while or something like that.
Exactly. And so it's all of this appeasement. But I mean, when it comes to monkeypox, it's the same thing that they also kind of do with the whole AIDS and the HIV situation. Is that I mean, a lot of it also when the blood donations, they were saying, it's okay, we can do this. Why? Because campaigners were like, oh, we should be able to give it. Fuck the actual scientific downsides of doing stuff. It's as long as you feel good about it. And it's just, and the thing is you can't tell me that going through all of these contortions of language don't get in the way of the actual science in the process.
No, they do. They do. Or you might do. I may not get in the way of the actual science. What it may get in the way of is communicating it, which,
Right.
like, normative principle of science is communality, which is to say scientific scientific knowledge belongs to everybody, flat off, and period. With that as the goal there, but you do restrict that when you get to the point where you're starting to say, well, you can't publish this because it's going to offend people or it's going to do harm to this group. Never
Yeah.
mind the fact that you don't have any idea if there would be any harm at all. It just might.
And what's the trade-off between the harm of not allowing this study to get out?
Yeah.
And the other thing as well is talking about offending people. You will have people that are really dug down in this whole thing of, I'm not using the word equity because it's been co-opted. I'm a firm believer of reclaiming those words and actually
Mhm.
asserting their real meaning. But when it comes to it, you will have people that look at these studies, see a couple of keywords and go, oh, this is all a load of woke bullshit. But
Yeah,
the study itself and the science and the data could be completely legitimate. It's just the way that it's framed and the way that
exactly.
it's wrapped.
And
And that,
that's a very good point, is that folks shouldn't just utterly discount a study because it's got a woke term in it. It should be
yeah,
worth actually reading it, because some of them, like the comment against the American Physical Society's God forsaken. I can hardly say it without laughing because it's such an awful article. But it's the article on observing whiteness in introductory physics. They used a whole bunch of terms that folks would be woke when they wrote the comment, when they wrote the comment in response to the article, but that's just because they had to write in response to the article. It's not
yeah,
because they actually agreed with anything the original article was saying.
yeah. I mean, and the other
Reminds
thing
me,
is,
for folks, I am going to do a review of article after the last SciChat Saturday. Anna sent me the article, so I am going to do a review of it. It it has to do. It is also from the American Physical Society, published by one of their journals. It has to do with oh goodness, how do I describe this? Incorporating into the physical concept of energy, incorporating equity into the physical concept of energy when you're teaching it.
I'm so glad I left school and I'm out in the real world
This
now.
is basically a thing about teaching teachers about how to incorporate equity into their lessons on what the physical concept of energy is. Physics concept of energy.
We're so doomed. I, and I can't help but see the parallels here with everything that I've been talking about ESG and stakeholder capitalism, right? It's the idea that the stakeholders take precedence over the actual dominant strand of what this is meant to be for. And if the stakeholders are, not on board with this, then, or should I say that stakeholders, i.e., anybody that the thing touches along its way, whether it be a burger, right? Who are the stakeholders? Well, the stakeholders.
Are we
They
making
are.
a mistake?
Yes, let's think of the life of a stake. Who's the stakeholders? Well, you'll have the environmental, squad. You'll have the farmers and all of those. You'll have all of these people. You have all of these like people, and that's who's meant to take precedent over the actual shareholders. And so, in a way, I don't know whether this crosses over too much in this world, but I would see that the same framework is there, where the shareholders, i.e., the science and the people invested into the science itself, or where the studies are done, it's the shareholders, i.e., the people affected by this, and all of these things. That's the voices, and they're the ones that shout the loudest. And so it's the same kind of gatekeeping that you see. It's
Yeah.
insane.
Well, this is the last thing in the introduction, so we'll finish this and then we can go have some fun with some of the sections.
Oh yeah,
Ask, whenever possible, ask the person or group what terms they use. Language is always evolving, and there's not always agreement about the best words to use. For example, see the sections on race or gender identity. So here's the problem with that from the scientist perspective, is that for a discipline, you do need some common language so you can actually communicate to each other.
yeah. I mean, if only there were a language that provided. Oh yeah, English. English. You know, what has been what has been used in scientific workings in the West for a long, long time, and stuff like that. That's a very
In
good.
English, the two common languages for for scientific literature are English and French.
Mm. But I mean, but the unwoke version of it, the things that have have come to be common parlance with individuals over time. And the thing is because they've all got this kind of schizophrenic thing on language where they make it up as they go along. Um, there will never be understanding because the thing is as soon as there's a common understanding, it doesn't become subversive any longer.
Yeah, so you end up changing the language.
Exactly.
Okay, well, this
Good
is just
God.
to make a point on the references. So that was our lovely introduction.
Oh Jesus, this was just the introduction.
Yeah, we just got reading the introduction. That's it.
We had so many points to pick apart on the introduction. Wow.
So yeah, we can have fun. I mean, we don't have to do all of these, but we can have fun.
I want to know the image guidelines.
The image guidelines, inclusive
Yeah.
images. What are inclusive images?
I don't know. You tell me, Adrian. I'm all ears.
I have no idea myself. Inclusive images intentionally include a variety of people and seek to portray people respectfully and disrupt stereotypes. In many cases, this means showing marginalized people in active, strong roles and not defaulting to showing those who have historically held power in society. A Forum One blog post, really, originally published in 2019 by Acacia Betancourt, recommends asking several questions to avoid bias when choosing images. Most importantly, who is missing or excluded? A related question is who has historically been missing or excluded from this type of content. Consider multiple characteristics when deciding what people to show in images. Avoid using the same combinations of characteristics. For example, when you show Black people, don't always show people with the same skin tone, hair texture, or body size. Diversity in images should be a concern not only when full people are shown, but also when only showing part of a person, such as the hands. A selection of characteristics to consider are below.
I always go through this exercise when I post on Twitter a picture of my steak dinner. I go, who's been excluded? Everybody, right? Who's historically excluded? Me, because I haven't had so much steak in my life. So I'm going to, revel in. I mean, come on.
So, yeah, in other words, your pictures have to have people from all of these different kinds of things.
You know what's funny is if you not now.
And again, I will say this is kind of really important when you're talking about like again medical, psychological sciences and things like that is where a lot of this kind of stuff would come in because physical sciences we typically wouldn't use these things. We wouldn't typically use pictures of people. I mean, but the only place I could see it showing up in a physical sciences thing where somebody somewhere would want to consider this is, say we're hosting a workshop and we're doing a workshop report for a journal. Those kinds of things show up in journals too. So that would be the only place. But anyway, sorry, just to preface, go on.
Yeah, no, I was going to say as well, I can't see a situation whereby this would be applicable because if you think about it, if it is in a, like a medical thing where they're studying like a horrible skin-eating bacteria on someone's arm, right? You said discharge to begin with, so I'm getting you back. And so I haven't forgot about that. So it's like that will be a close up of like wherever the affected area is, right? They're not going to have like Jenny's hand coming in just like that because she's Black. It's like, can you imagine like the diversity hands?
Yeah, I mean, that just doesn't sound right.
But the thing is as well that to actually achieve this, you would have to coordinate a photo shoot or coordinate the actual scene, and you wouldn't be focusing, as you said, on the individual unless that was required to the situation. The only time I can kind of see is when they're kind of ancillary images, a bit like, and this is what I was going to say to you, if you go to the front page on this whole website, not right now, but on the front page, the panel of images were interesting because they were a diversity quota. And the only white woman in there was a large white woman, which is probably the fat positivity token. But everybody else, there were Asians, there were black people, there
Mm.
were Latinos or Latinx, whatever you want to call it. But it was
Yeah, no,
interesting,
it wasn't this document. It was the CDC,
right?
the CDC style guide, which we don't need to go back there.
No, no, no. But the thing is, this is what happens. And correct me wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong. If this is written by them, but this is what happens when you get guidance documents and enforcement by activists rather than actually people that work in the field, i.e., scientists.
Well,
Is this written by scientists?
this is written by the scholarly publishers. So these are folks who may have backgrounds in their respective disciplines, but are not perhaps active researchers in those disciplines. Because because editors and peer reviewers are not paid by the journal. They're paid by the respective universities. They're experts in their fields. But
Uh-huh.
the actual publishers are paid by the respective publishing companies and the scholarly houses that do all that publishing, whether it be books or journals. So it's kind of yes and no. And what I was going to say is, like, I have heard it many times over. Unfortunately, scientists who are basically like, yeah, we everything's political, so we can incorporate our political activism into our research. We just got to do it subtly so people don't see it. And I'm sitting there like, oh fuck. Oh fuck.
Yep.
At that point, when you're doing that to me and you're deliberately incorporating your activism into your science, you're not a scientist anymore, you're a scientist.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I mean. It's
Air quotes for those who might be listening and watching with air quotes on the last scientist.
yeah. I can't with these people. They just drive me insane.
You and me both. That's the reason I wore the shirt today. It's fine.
Yeah.
But okay, so let's see here. Finding images that show diversity and inclusion. Oh, this is funny. Um,
Holy moly.
some databases purposely focus on photos showing diversity or images of people who are marginalized because of their race, gender, age, or other characteristics. Typo. Typo. Do you see that?
I do, but you're not being inclusive. They could have been dyslexic.
Oh, shut up.
Uh,
A selection of these resources is below. Another strategy is to use targeted search functions with more general image banks. For example, use search terms that include a specific race, or use filters that exclude a socially dominant group, exclude white from search results. Um, so these are all, these are all like stock images kind of thing.
I'm trying to find the all go one.
Can we all go plus size stock photos?
Yeah, we got to look at this.
Hang on, I got it.
The the swim collection. God knows, spare us.
I'm
The
not
office,
going there. Don't worry.
let's do the office collection. Oh God, they look insufferable. Not because they're fat, but because they've got that kind of oh Jesus.
Oh, there you go. I'm going back now.
Yeah, please. Let's return to the weird pseudo safety of the other site. What else have we got?
No, I mean it's not because they're fat. It's just because it's the body positivity thing is just so annoying. Is really what it is. Is what you were trying to say, I think.
Yeah, I mean some of them are absolute units, but all power to them.
Absolutely.
Whatever. It's like happy days. And if they can get paid,
Let it clear for YouTube. We are not saying anybody should be harassed because of their weight. Thank you very much.
no, I am at this point borderline chest feeder. So, it's back off. Back off. But no, I mean, look, if you can get paid for being a large stock image influencer, then the joys of capitalism.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious because this is what I deal with as a woman in a STEM discipline myself.
What a scientist looks like. Is that TM? that isn't placed properly.
That is a trademark thing that's not placed properly.
Yeah, that should be upper script. God. You can tell I've been spending God knows how long doing a website.
And we'll get to that. All right. So there you go. Apparently there's a whole
Oh God, that's unfortunate. Nappy.co. I'm sorry, but nappy.co.
yeah, no, that's not a good name for a website.
Black and brown people. You know what a nappy is?
No, and I don't want to know if it's going to get me booted off.
No, no, no. A nappy is like the UK term for a diaper. Yeah.
Somebody should tell them that.
Wow. Wow. What a
Oh,
load
that's not good. That's an
No.
intentional fail on their part.
No.
That's a fail on their part. Okay, never mind. Shall we continue?
Definitely a shit decision, but I digress.
Oh, you're gonna kill me.
Not before they come for us.
Welcome to the gulag, comrade. Let's see. Examine your portfolio. You're a photojournalist. Here you go. Think about your entire portfolio when assessing the diversity and inclusion of your images. It is unrealistic to expect that a single photo or illustration will show the diversity in your audience, and in fact may come across as performative. Taking a portfolio approach will allow you to use several images to show a wide variety of people. Periodically examine the images your organization uses so that you can identify what people tend to get left out. The If Then initiative offers a toolkit to identify gender representation in images, and this tool can be modified to apply to any characteristic. Beyond single factors like gender, your assessment should account for variety within a characteristic. For example, when you show women, do you tend to show women of a certain race or body type? Identify what patterns in your imagery may exclude people and how you can introduce greater diversity. So I will say this is also about the scholarly publishing houses. So this is, books, anything that might be published under that scholarly heading. So they are looking at it themselves in terms of what is going on with their own organizations, but also what gets published by the organizations.
Yeah, I think back to my science lessons and the textbooks and everything, there was just like an absolute ton of stock images in there. So I guess this would be applicable for those kind of things. But I mean, it's still a load of bunk, but it's still applicable.
Yeah. Let's see. Pair with policy changes. Showing diversity and inclusion in images alone and not in your organization's content or actions will appear hypocritical to audiences. Inclusive images should be combined with policies to make the organization more diverse, inclusive, and equitable.
It's so funny because I read that like we've got to this point. It's like, you're doing so well. You're doing so well. Not good enough. Now do this.
Don't be performative. Do not make superficial attempts to show diversity and wait.
I was, I was reading
that they're doing performative.
I was, but also I was reading at the same pace you were. I wasn't reading ahead, and I was about to make the comment. So if I just put a black person on the front cover of a book, and if you read on, it says, for example, do not just put a photo of a person of color.
I mean, yeah.
I'll at least put a trans quadriplegic black. What other things? Lesbian, non-binary person on the front cover. I tick all boxes then. She has Asian heritage as well.
I feel like this is just the perfect thing to highlight hypocrisy because this whole thing is performative anyway.
Right.
Yeah. Avoid stereotypes. Inclusive images do not simply have diverse people in them. They also should purvey them respectfully and avoid stereotypes. On the start of that first sentence, I actually kind of agree.
Yeah.
Generally want to be nice and not show people in ugly, compromised positions that emphasize a stereotype about something.
Right.
For example, avoid inspiration porn. What the hell is that?
I mean, look, don't get me wrong. That's a general term that you like.
Hold on. It explains it a little bit more, which uses people with disabilities as only objects of inspiration and avoid poverty porn.
It's so funny because you're saying these words and like I'm coming up with points, but I'm only reading as far as you are. And as soon as I come up with something, it says it further on, like poverty porn.
which people in extreme poverty, who are largely portrayed as people of color, are shown without dignity.
Well, it's not that at all, actually. Poverty porn is a bit like when you have these big charity events, like in the UK, we have like Red Nose Day or Comic Relief, and you see all of these videos of like Angelina Jolie going out to sub-Saharan Africa with this baby with flies around its face and everything. She's going, I'm here with little Tommy, and he has to walk 5 miles to go to the well. And it's like, and then you're sat there and you go, and then you realize that they're all actors, or you realize that Angelina Jolie's gone in for 10 seconds to film the video and then she fucks off again. That's what poverty porn is.
Yeah.
And I can understand that. What was it called? Inspiration porn.
Yeah.
I'm getting the same thing. It's like, wow, these people are so inspirational. That's what I'm guessing is. But it's weird that I guess they put it in quotes there because I was going to say it doesn't feel on brand with like the formal writing.
It does. Let's see. Before including images of a certain population, do research on how to most respectfully portray them. For example, one study argues that photos of people in prison can contribute to stigma if the images contain elements of unworthiness, unpleasantness, or immutability.
That also goes along with my study on prisoners' health statistics. You know, why wouldn't I put a picture of a prisoner in that? Right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to put a picture of, Duncan sitting down in Denny's. It's like, no, like the study is specifically about that.
I mean, the other thing is that you're in prison for a reason, usually because you did something really heinous to the rest of society. It's supposed to be unpleasant. You're supposed to be somewhat robbed of your rights in a prison.
Right. I mean, you can't imagine like they're happy, smiling,
With the
like
exception of the unethical stuff. Don't get me wrong, but you don't like have.
Right. Rick G points out in the chat. He says that's one of the ideas of prison. Right.
Yeah, exactly, Rick G. Welcome.
It's insane to me because not only that, but stock images aren't used arbitrarily, right? They're used very specifically. So why would you put a picture? And here's the other thing, right? Here's where they also shoot themselves in the foot again, is because they say that you've got to show like the diversity of life and everything like that. Well, there are people in prison, so why are they underrepresentative
of and also moreover, if you're talking about the diversity of life is also suffering. It's not just necessarily respect and all happy, joyful, and things like that. No, you're gonna have moments you suck. I have cancer. That sucks.
Exactly. Well, no, person with cancer. Don't dehumanize. But the thing is, though, is like those kind of very niche situations. They're not the norm. So you wouldn't include that stock photo of someone in like an orange jumpsuit with a ball and chain unless it was very specific to the thing that you were, attaching the image to. You wouldn't just go, "Oh, this is a a book I've written on the Hadron Collider, and so I'm going to put someone in prison fatigues on the front cover." I mean, come on, it doesn't make any sense. So
when you said that orange jumpsuit with a ball and chain, you just reminded me of a MythBusters episode. Actually,
was it the one where they were doing a Godiva? Lady Godiva. You know what I'm trying to say. MacGyver, even Godiva.
No. They actually did test whether or not you could. It was one of the very old episodes of MythBusters, but they tested whether or not you could shoot yourself to freedom by loading the ball from your ball and chain into the cannon.
Oh.
It doesn't work because the force of the cannon will rip your leg off. Is really what it does. But
swings and roundabouts. How much do you want to be free? See, that's where I would put someone in orange fatigues on my study book, because my study would be about whether you can you can get your through that. Good God.
Let's see. The Conscious Style Guide, apparently. There's a Conscious Style Guide, also has resources that can aid in researching inclusive images.
Have you seen the unconscious one?
Yeah. Some aspects to consider when evaluating whether an image is appropriate include the following: who is in the foreground, who is in the background, who is out of focus, who is in the position of power, who is in the subordinate role, who is shown in full view, who is partly obscured, who is larger, who is smaller, who is behaving appropriately, and who is not. How the hell do you determine that?
Well, I guess if someone's shoving their ball from the ball and chain in a cannon, I guess we've got a good indication of who's acting inappropriately.
What environments are people shown in? In addition to evaluating each image on its own, examine the entire project, book, or article to identify problematic patterns. For example, are images of people of color always shown in less important sidebar instead of in the main text? Also, ensure that objects of cultural or religious significance are treated respectfully and appropriate for the context. Take special care with illustrations, as cartoons and similar formats often contain stereotypes. Hiring a diverse team of professionals to create, locate, and review images can help prevent the perpetuation of harmful stereotypes in images.
Now, I will say, as a photographer, right? Um, Everything that they've mentioned there is, of course, not to their ideological ends, but in itself is everything that goes into my mind when I'm planning a shoot and shooting a photo. And as I say to people, when I advise people on kind of like the marketing side of things, or when they're creating videos and things, you have to justify every single thing that's in your shot. If you can't justify it, it doesn't belong there. And when you're shooting stuff, and this is the thing you've got to think about, these images aren't talking about stock images from like, for example, if I went and took a picture of the street in London, you can't control that environment. So that's an environmental shot that you've got. You might put it up for a stock image. But it seems like what they're talking about here is like those really stylized stock images that are created. Now, there's two things here. If you are a publisher, you're going to have very limited access to controlling the images unless you are physically commissioning the shoot yourself, which they don't usually do. They pull from a bank of images. But when it comes to stuff, of course, you're thinking about this because your image is encoded with loads of stuff and different meanings. And so when you are given a brief as to how to create an image, of course you think of all of this stuff, but you cannot do that if you don't have connection with the photographer who took it. If you're just looking at a bank of images, you kind of have to go with which one's best, or you do commission the photos to be taken.
Right. And I think, yeah, that's the last one. Do no harm. Beyond avoiding stereotypes, inclusive images preserve people's dignity and avoid causing harm to others. For example, the organization Time to Change recommends not using images that show self harm or people with mental illness and acute distress, as those images may be triggering. Similarly, Beat, a UK eating disorder charity, recommends not using images of emaciated body parts.
I mean, I love the way that they've used mental illness there because I thought that was a taboo term we couldn't use. And I don't look at this. I kind of agree in a sense of, well, hang on. I'm thinking about it something else beyond. I'm thinking about it more from an advertising point of view because I think from an advertising point of view, I don't think that it's good to put certain images there that may trigger, and I use that in the actual term, may trigger certain things. And if I'm anorexic or I've got an eating disorder, I don't think I'd come forward if I had a picture of someone that was just skin and bones on there.
Yeah.
On their material. However, if you're doing a scientific study and you're doing a scientific textbook, you require accurate resources to show what an emaciated body, looks like.
Yeah, I mean, if you're doing a medical study about anorexia and some of the bad side effects of it, then yeah, having an emaciated person in there to show that this kind of thing can happen. What?
I said emancipated, not
Yeah, emaciated, not emancipated.
I haven't had caffeine. I haven't eaten. Carry on.
So that was images. There's a distinct amount of other things that we can get into.
Contributors and participants be interesting because that is another one that when it came up with a trans style guide that I have, it was talking about the fact.
Look.
Oh God, those. I think they've been sniffing too much of those fumes.
But yeah.
But that's the thing. When it comes to the contributors and oh wait, hang on, this is different.
This is contributors and participants. So these are.
I thought this was a style guide on how to handle contributors to studies.
No. This is the actual. This is the actual list of contributors.
Because I was going to say the trans style guide that I have is interesting because their argument is that
Like, plot,
experts may not be the experts. It should be people in the community, and they're the ones that you should cite.
yeah. PLOS is a publisher for sure. The American Geophysical Union, while they're a professional society, it's also a publisher. A lot of universities have their own presses here in the US. So, like
Mm,
Cambridge University Press, so that's the
yeah.
University of Georgia. Intellect Books, American Society of Civil Engineers, again, Oxford University Press. Oh, hey, isn't this name familiar in the news?
Oh yes. Oh
American
yes.
Library Association is trying to stop. It's trying to stop somebody from having an event at libraries on August 5th, I believe. That came out recently. Um,
Maybe they should be more inclusive.
Indeed. Let's see. C4 Disc Administrator, Oxford University Press, King Saud University, American Medical Association Psychiatry, Wiley. Yeah, that's another big publisher of multiple journals. Oh, neurologists. How does that make you feel? You got the neurologists.
Oh, happy days. Happy days.
Wits University Press, the American Chemical Society. Yeah, no, this is the actual list of people who contributed to this thing. So that's not what we were going for, but
No.
I'm just curious about this one. So let's see.
Race, a social construct.
I was going to ask you about this because I read it before, and tell me if I'm reading this correctly. A social construct that describes people with shared physical characteristics not based on biology, not synonymous with skin color, ethnicity, or nationality. If it's shared physical characteristics, but it's not based on biology, am I reading that right? That seems a contradiction.
A shared construct that describes people with shared physical characteristics not based on biology. I mean, not only is that
Am I right that
contradictory,
that's a contradiction?
it's also not true, right? Because if I went and stayed on a tropical island and I browned up quite nicely from a nice suntan, then I would have the shared physical characteristics of specific races that maybe are, a couple of Pantones of brown or something. You get what I mean? It's like that I would therefore be part of that race until, I become anemic again,
Yeah,
like I'm inevitably going to.
yeah. Well, and shared physical characteristics doesn't necessarily mean anything because it's outward in the sense that, you know, what you just described, like an outward characteristic. But the other thing is just like, how many people do we have that are like multiracial in Western
Right.
countries now, right?
You get a lot of black Asians as well. So I mean, what are they,
How does this work? If you're doing shared physical characteristics and yet it's not based on biology or ethnicity or nationality.
and I'm always fascinated. Are they saying that this is what race means, or is this
No,
what they're
yeah, this is
saying,
their
how they're using it?
it is important to talk about matters related to race and ethnicity using terms that the community prefers and uses to self-identify rather than defaulting to what is generally accepted by dominant power holders and structures.
So in other words, let's do what they makes them feel better rather than objective reality of what the
Mhm.
terms mean.
Yeah. This may require questioning and reimagining terms that have historically been used in favor of those identified by and for specific communities. Despite common belief, a person's race, ethnicity, or nationality cannot be determined simply by looking at them. That is a statement that I actually agree with.
Yeah,
I very much agree with. But
yeah.
then you make this confused thing that, yeah, these are definitions here that they have.
But this is what I'm saying. Are they saying that this is what race means, or is they saying that this is how they are defining them specifically to this project that they're doing?
I think this is how they are defining it because I
Yeah,
don't think if anybody looked it up, it ended up being that. But
because they're prefacing it by saying that it's what the community prefers.
yeah. So,
So they are acknowledging that there are two definitions because they're saying that there is one that's the dominant power structure definition,
right.
and this is what they want to use as the one that appeases the basically the audience that they're playing
Very
to.
good point, Rick G.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But okay, so let's see. They say don't mention. which I kind of agree with that. Hey, if it's not relevant, no bother.
Yeah.
Um, what assumptions are about default characteristics are made within a story? Avoid portraying people as stereotypes. Well, yeah, I mean that's just a general good rule of thumb, regardless.
Right,
It's just
right. And
funny
they
that
wrap it up like it's
given
their idea.
of like given the thing of like what we were talking about, things being defined as white. Well, you're inherently stereotyping people. You guys have contradictions aplenty. Um, avoid generalizations and vague terms. Do not use continents as descriptors.
I'm sorry, don't use vague terms. Okay, we're going to use people as, people with cancer, and use vague
Look
terms.
at this. Look, look, look.
Oh my God.
Another bloody typo.
And the thing is, as well, is it's like they're saying don't use vague terms. They use the vague terms by bastardizing the language.
Yeah,
Then they said don't make it performative. Well, they've said here that they basically said that this is all performative by using a definition that is a performative definition rather than an actual definition.
right. Let's see. Are terms capitalized when they should be? Many style guides now recommend capitalizing black. This goes to your thing earlier.
Hmm.
Although there is still some disagreement about whether white should be capitalized. Um, Note that in some countries like South Africa, it is not common to capitalize these words. Almost like we have different things going on in different countries with different
Right, right.
preferences and some of those kinds of things. Let's see. Consider the context. For example, while black is a term that some in the US have embraced, not all with African ancestry identify this way. In Nigeria, people are more likely to identify as part of an ethnic group, such as Yoruba or Igbo. Um, I think a person, also a person with
Let us know in
Haitian.
the comments.
Yeah, you know how to pronounce that because I don't. I apologize if I butchered the pronunciation, but
I'm just looking forward to coming back in a week's time to see people trying to use through type how to pronounce the word.
also, a person with Haitian ancestry who was born in the United States might identify as Haitian rather than Black or Haitian American. Um, I actually don't have a problem with this because I'm just like, yeah, maybe people identify from cultures with different countries and Ebo,
Right.
Ebo. Thank you, Rick G.
There we go. Well, that was that answers my question. But I think this comes down to the fact of the idea that they've got it all wrong, and again, it might sound controversial, but I don't think there is a catch-all thing of black culture. I think it is a misnomer.
Yeah,
I think that there is Caribbean culture, there is Haitian culture, there is all these different things. Now, if you were to look at them, you might say, "Oh, well, they're black," right? And also, black to me is such a ridiculous term because no one's technically black. They're all different shades. The only race that is pretty much the same Pantone is white, and even that's not white, right? So it's like very weird descriptors, but
no,
that's just
skin
me
tones
being
are weird.
precise.
Skin tones are weird things, but even then, to your point, culture is not connected with race or skin tone half as much as it's connected with ethnicity and where you grew up and what
Right,
kind
and
of cultural
and
things
and
were around you.
and this is the point I always make, right? It's like if I were to be born in the West and my father was Japanese, for example, I might not have that Japanese culture in my upbringing.
Yeah,
The same as if I immigrate to, hopefully one day, to the US,
we hope we
then
get here someday too.
one day. Um, but then I would be, I would have that American culture, right? And so that's the thing. Culture is not defined. Culture is fluid, I think,
Hmm.
and it's something that is not baked in. Whereas race is you are the race you are for whatever
Right.
whatever reason. Um, but culture is like something completely different and is not fixed.
No, indeed. Although I'm going to give them some credit because they actually identified this, and I have pointed it out to things like the AGU for a while that in surveys, Hispanic and Latino people don't like the term Latinx.
Yeah, yeah,
So this actually is, thank goodness they are actually saying something about this here, which so I will give them credit where credit is due, despite the rest of this being pretty much a bunch of garbage.
And
But
it's funny because if you notice as well, though, that they've prefaced it on the opposite end of your argument.
hmm,
So they've said here, for example, only. Oh no, sorry, I read that wrong. They were actually saying it as a negative. I thought they were going to say, for example, X amount of people identify, blah, blah, prefer. So in other words, people do enjoy that, so you should identify them as that. But what you're saying is obviously it actually works in our favor as objective individuals, not just people that say, I identify as non-binary, which is obviously where they're going with this, but it does work actually in everybody's favor.
yeah. Yeah, and the other one after that is like the Native Governance Center does not recommend that non-native folks use American Indian or Indian, where other organizations recommend this language. And I will say that I do have some experience with that, and that is the case. That there's some that are okay with it and some that are not. But
Is
there are a
that
lot
the
of times,
idea that
especially
your
with like
heritage?
the American side of things, the Native American tribes. A lot of them kind of do have a preference to be referred to by the exact name of the tribe,
Mm,
not to be called a Native American. So you might refer to a person as a person or a group as the Chickasaw people, or
mm.
the Choctaw people, or um, Comanche, or any number of there's something like 70 tribal nations in the United States. So
But I mean, that just comes down to precise language,
yeah,
right? It's like, why would you use the term that the example they gave of older Asian women rather than using very precise? Because I can't imagine that, or the way you would preface it, you would say that, our study shows that Native Americans, and then in brackets, you would put the breakdown of the tribes.
yeah,
You wouldn't go, our study shows that, X, Y, Z, all of these things. And so it's all down to formatting as well.
right.
But why would you choose general sweeping stereotypes over?
Being
Oh,
specific anyway. Yeah.
exactly. Especially in the pursuit of science.
Yeah. No, and I got this hammered into me when I was doing my PhD. It's just like be specific, be specific, be
Yeah.
specific. And I'm sure it's the same kind of thing for the social science guys, because obviously I was in a physical science realm for the most part. So I'm sure it's for the social science guys. This is something they have to deal with too. Um, be respectful. Do not use pejorative terms. I don't know anybody who has a food color appearance. So I don't know where this would come from, to be honest. So,
Can
I
you
mean,
imagine
in
reading
general,
it?
I kind of agree. I would not want somebody to be named that they have the color of like food.
Can you
And I
imagine
do
a
actually kind of
study?
agree with the sentiment there.
Can you imagine a study with a title going, 1 in 4 caramel and chocolate colored people
That
identify?
would end badly. That would
Oh, it
end
would.
badly.
Though it's such an inverse at the moment, it'll probably be welcomed and published. It
No,
just,
no, 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 no. No, once they figured out what you were talking about, the way things are, you'd be run out on a rail, which
I
I've
just,
never heard of anybody who matches that.
no.
That's
The
not
thing,
real to begin with.
the other thing as well is that I think what they're doing here is they're putting these little red herrings of
Yeah,
like some of the most egregious things to make it sound that their guide is to solve these problems that were never there to begin with, because the guides that are in existence for everything are completely adequate.
yeah. Let's see. So, following definitions may be useful, but should not be considered comprehensive. So, these are just definitions of different
And again, these are completely fine.
mhm,
Being precise with your language.
terms to avoid or use with caution.
Yeah, that was interesting. The BAME community was what we used to call them, and then Floyd happened and everything around that, and it all got
See,
turned on its head.
I read an acronym in a paper one time, many years ago, and I thought I put it up on my Facebook for the rest of the scientists that I work with, just like example of things not to do.
Hmm.
They had an acronym for the group that they were studying in this paper, and I was just like, bad acronym, very bad acronym, very bad acronym. Because they were studying, in their words, women and underrepresented minorities. Can you pull together the acronym? They shrunk all of that down and they kept referring in the paper to worm, worm, worm everywhere to refer to women and underrepresented minorities. I'm like, who thought this was a good idea?
I don't know why, but when you said that, I suddenly had the video playing in my head of Chrissy Mayer at the strip club before her wedding doing the worm on the dance floor.
But no, I can understand the acronyms not being
right. But why do we have to use LGBTQIABLT? Right.
Well, that's not in this section because this section's about race. But
no, but you get what I mean. Like that is an acronym. It's acronyms when they suit.
Yeah. There's some fun words here, yeah. But in the vein of words, I can share it because the I'm not ever going to put it up publicly because there's no way in heck I could get away with it. Do you remember that Stanford Inclusivity style guide of like these are bad words, you should replace them with these? Stanford had to pull it down because of the backlash.
Yes, I think so.
So over the holidays, I decided, you know what, I'm gonna have some fun with this, and maybe when I get back over Christmas, after Christmas, I can use it and talk about how bad these inclusivity style guide things are because of changing the sentence or things. So I wrote a paragraph, and I basically included as many words as I could from that list of words that they thought were bad.
Oh, I remember this. Yes.
And then I translated it to all their replacement words, and then I read it, and it was like, there's no way in hell I can read this online. Because it's just like, it was the most god awful piece of straight up nastiness that I can't even get it out how bad it was. And it's just like, even my mother read it and was like, yeah, you can't do anything. You can't talk about that. That it ends so badly. I'm just like, that is how bad their inclusivity style guide is, because it would come out to be some of the most awful. I mean, the best way I can say it is was some of the most racist garbage that came out from their inclusivity style guide. It was so bad. So that's why that's the other reason for looking at these things. Like, wait a second, are you inadvertently saying something you shouldn't? Because that's what happens if you start changing out the words like that.
Oh, that's brilliant.
So,
oh my God.
But anyway, for those of you who are wondering, no, you will never see it. You will never see it because it was that bad. But yeah, so that's the race section. I mean, part of me wonders if they do with like, if they do say, hey, you should use LGBTQ or not. Oh boy, we have a thing on misgendering. Distinguish between, oh, look, they have the cisgender thing in here.
Oh God. Oh, God.
All of this comes from the American Psychological Association, apparently.
Of course it does. They're all nutters.
No, they actually don't have the acronym in here. What do you know?
That's interesting. You know, because a lot of the time, the reason that they ride under the same banner or they try and incorporate so many things is because it's this whole idea of solidarity. And that's the reason that they incorporate so many different groups and the intersections and things like that. But it is interesting that then when they're in power or they're the ones thingying it.
You got to read this.
When a marginalized person claims language to describe their oppressed identity, they are speaking themselves into existence in a society that is trying to annihilate them. When a privileged person rejects an accurate descriptor of their privileged status, they are refusing to acknowledge that they are privileged. So
I think about the whole argument over cisgender and cis that popped up on Twitter, actually. But considering that this is for like scholarly publishing, again,
it's like an oppressed summoning spell. They're speaking themselves into existence. I've just got like image of like Star Trek or something, with like, you know, when they come into the, oh gosh.
I know. There you go.
The phrase preferred pronouns should not be used as it implies that gender identity is a choice. Rather, simply use pronouns or identified pronouns or self-identified gender identity. Oh my God. I can't. I can't. When a person does not,
Yeah, this is where it gets interesting because, of course, how do you deal with this when you're talking about biology and sexology research? This is where this kind of stuff comes in, and it becomes starts to become an interesting problem in how you incorporate the language.
yeah, and the preference is that the norm is non-binary or genderless. When a person does not use specific terms to describe themselves, e.g., queer, well, that sounds like a really weird author. Who wrote that book, e.g., queer? Or cannot be asked which terms they use. Possible considerations include gender neutral, using neutral terminology, using general terms, or omitting that aspect of their identity. But isn't that annihilating them to not accept their identity, or explaining why particular terms were used? I mean, oh my gosh.
So there's a lot of odd things in here for sure, but I mean, I'm kind of partial that like this is one of those things. It's like if the self-identified identity doesn't matter anyway to the scientific article, why do you even bother including it?
Right, precisely. It's double talk because on the one hand, it's you shouldn't include stuff that's not relevant, but then you should include it because you've then got to put a big qualifier there to push the ideological message.
Right. Gender is a social construct, apparently.
Oh God.
Yep. Okay. I didn't want to dwell on that too much. The primary purpose to go here was to actually see whether or not they were demanding folks use the acronym or not use the acronym,
Yeah, yeah.
which they are not demanding that. So, I mean, we don't there's a long thing of things that we could get into here, but the point is to say with all of this stuff is it's being forced into academic publishing if it hasn't been there already. Which is more than a little concerning because you can't necessarily talk accurately about certain things anymore, and that's the purpose of science is figure out what the truth is. And yeah, the truth isn't always the most friendly thing to figure out for sure.
And this does nothing for making science and studies and things accessible to the average Joe.
It doesn't at all. It actually and this is the thing for accessibility. This is probably one of the barriers that I deal with, and one of the reasons I do the reviews that I do on my channel is just like I know this terminology and language is damn near impossible for somebody who's not a trained scholar or scientist to read and get a handle on. So tell me, how are you improving accessibility, and particularly when we're moving, because more and more we're moving into open access, where journals are going to be available to everybody under the sun,
Mm.
kind of things.
And there's an appetite as well. There is a big
Yeah,
appetite, and let's remove our political leanings here and our viewpoints on the world. With everything going on, there is an appetite for average people to go and look at the studies, which I'm all in favor for. But there is a truth there that not everybody is skilled to be able to decipher a
yeah,
lot of that stuff. Now, I am not of the camp that, they should be completely discredited because people will see stuff and they will be able to translate stuff.
yeah.
But the point being is that when you know that these studies are not a preserve of the intelligentsia, and it is now going out to the general public, then there needs to be efforts made to translate a lot of this. And that's not to say that you can't have something that is very, hoity-toity, very scientifically written. But I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't translations done for people and things like that, or things are dumbed down a little bit. I don't use the term dumbed down because it's not dumbing it down, but just making language a little bit more commonplace
Well,
language.
yeah, it's
Um,
language, it's words and definitions that folks in an expert field would know off the top of their heads and would be tacit
Common
knowledge.
language rather than niche.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so by doing this, you're not doing any favors. And actually, I'd be a little bit more sympathetic if they were using proper scientific terms that maybe went over my head, but this
Yeah.
isn't. This is using ideological terms.
Yeah.
That doesn't serve science, it serves an ideology.
Yeah, and it gets even better because then it's things like APA style guide here on using bias free language alongside of the issues with other things here. Oh, how do you handle all of these different kinds of things? This is just to make the point that this big
Yeah.
thing that we were just looking at is not the only one. And I mean, yep.
And it brings it back. It brings it back to the central point that
Mm,
that I've been talking about is that you can't really trust what you read or listen to right off the bat, because you should you should understand that a lot of the narrative is already pre-baked into this stuff. And it's like the pride event. So there was a pride event, obviously, like most countries over the world, in London. And I was like, oh, I might sign up and go down there and report on it. So I went through the media accreditation, and obviously I was in there too late. But they did have a little style guide that said how you should report on these events. So these are notes to editors of how they should report on Pride, which already shapes the reporting.
mm,
And the public aren't aware of that. They'll never know about that. But then they read a lot of this stuff. So there's a lot manipulation done before it even gets to the consumer.
yeah. Yeah. And it's unfortunately existing in the journal side of things. So, like, this is the one that originally prompted me into this whole idea that this kind of thing was going on, is the notion of American Chemical Society of all places. and
And you see
they're,
how insidious it is as well, based on the chat that we had last time with the studies,
yeah,
is that it feeds itself. These studies are written in ideological terms. They're then sent in press releases to journalists that don't know how to read them. They then publish them. The public reads the news articles with the encoded text and the styles from the journalistic point of view. So it's just compounding and compounding.
yeah. So, like, here's their kind of why you should use this. Inclusive communication helps you. We all have implicit biases, sometimes referred to interchangeably as unconscious bias, and unchecked, these biases can appear in writing and images. The human brain is capable of change, and with awareness of those biases can purposeful work to overcome them, we can create environments that are truly inclusive of everyone. Inclusive communication is more accurate, respecting the way that people want to be described. For example, by using their correct pronouns, makes communication more accurate.
I was half hoping they were going to slip up and say preferred pronouns.
So, I mean, here's the thing. How do I say this? What if way a person wants to be described, their subjective description of themselves, for whatever reason, is not accurate?
My kind of thing in that situation would be the word preferred pronoun already sets the stage to say that this is a subjective choice.
Yeah.
However,
To just mean in general, like an anorexic person believes they're perfectly healthy when
right,
they're not.
I mean, that's the thing. Based on this style guide, any kind of studies on anorexia, you would say, we've studied 5 healthy teenagers. Well, they're not. They're not. Or, and this is where this can't be based on the individual's feelings.
Mhm.
There has to be an objective outside thing governing this.
Right.
And there's so many contradictions that it makes my brain hurt, because you kind of just get knotted with, like, well, if this happens, then it means this. Then you have to go back to the start, because then it renders their previous point redundant. And it's just like, it feels like they've written this over God knows how long, but they've probably written a paragraph at a time, and then thrown the bits of
Together,
scraps of
yeah.
paper in the air, and then paste it all together.
Let's see. Inclusive communication expands your reach. Being inclusive helps you reach a wider audience. When people feel respected, I gotta ask if you if you think you're respecting someone, but your so-called inclusive communication is viewed as very disrespectful by the other person, what the hell are you doing? I mean, this is a thing. This is not necessarily, there is a whole field of science communication that tackles and looks at this question about how do you get science in the hands of everyday people? How do you get science used, kind of thing by everyday people? Um, and it's not necessarily, it is partially about the respect thing, but often what gets ignored. And I did, when I did a focus group on YouTube a while back, and one of the things I kept getting out of it over and over and over again is like, oh, they also recognize when people are being somewhat elitist who are scientists. You're not having the empathetic side of things, also. And so I've made a point on this, the difference between elitism and empathy. And
Mm.
I'm sorry, but the way a lot of these inclusive style guides are done, that's my opinion at this point, and I will say it, damn it, um, is that a lot of these kinds of style guides are wildly elitist.
Yeah, yeah, it is. It
I don't
is
know. What do you all
totally.
think in
Yeah.
the chat?
Yeah, tell us because this is insane. And the thing is, I don't know the composition of the chat, but a lot of these people aren't. We could have people here that aren't journalists, that aren't scientists, people that aren't subjected to necessarily having to adhere by these style guides. So, what is it that you think when you think about the fact that this is being done before you even know about it when you come to read the study, or you read about it in a newspaper because it's been published?
Yeah,
The other thing I would say as well is, yes, what you're saying about offending people. Okay, so you make the I don't know, trans non-binary community feel nice and fluffy because they're represented, but you calling a biological man a woman offends women,
yeah,
right? And the two different things here is that those trans non-binary communities, they will read the study and use the study as a weapon, whereas the women will be using it not as a weapon but as an actual informative tool, which it should be.
yeah,
And that's the thing. It's basically trying to give resources for ideological argumentation.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, the last thing here, like inclusive communication demonstrates a commitment to diversity, equity, inclusion, respect. Which, if you rearrange that, you'd get dire. But anyway, um, but
And
I
what are
mean,
they? They're all a tribe.
what if you don't share those values, or you view them in the negative, as many Americans do at this point, as many I'm sure in Europe do at this point? But one of the reasons I bring this up is because I talked about this with the video I did on the Hotez versus RFK debate. In that, I do think you don't have a mandate that you have to debate. I mean, that
Mm,
would go against the liberty kind of thing of, you can't force somebody to do something. But but I do think that Hotez should have debated, because the thing about it is that his kind of attitude and what have you, with his different values and pushing himself as holier than thou, has been one of the main reasons why at least half of the country has lost trust in health experts and in scientists in the last few years. It has not been because, everybody's all, you know, uninformed, uneducated rubes or things like that. No, look at your own damn attitudes. So that's actually kind of why I think you should have debated. But this is the same kind of thing. You're pushing your values, not necessarily sharing in any of mine.
yeah. Well,
So
it's
that's
because there's.
not necessarily going to help you um improve the trust in scientists, because that is a concern to me right now. Think of all the good things that science has done, and well, if science just suddenly becomes untrusted
Yeah.
by at least half of the world, well, this is a problem.
I think that's the thing. I mean, the way this is written and the people this is written for, there is only one correct way, a very homogenized way of seeing the world and interacting in it and believing. And
This is
so,
despite there being a lot of commentary about different ways of knowing. But anyway,
right, exactly. Within it's a bit like my analogy of me, you being in a prison cell and me saying, look at the freedom you've got. You can do anything you possibly could conceive of in this prison cell. Look at the freedom you have. You don't have freedom, but you have an illusion of it within those four walls. And so I think because their paradigm is one that rejects the possibility of alternatives as potentially good or equal or anything like that. That's why we can't understand it, because it's not baked into their notion.
yeah,
Now, when you come to I mean, obviously it was a side point, but with the debate situation, there is so much talk of misinformation and disinformation at the moment. And again, I'm not going to shy away from those terms because they do actually have applicable definitions
we
to
do.
them.
Yeah,
And the situation is that if you really feel cocksure in your facts that you have, you should be able to defend them. And let's say everything he's been saying is correct. It's not, but let's say it is. By him bucking out, yes, he doesn't have, there's not a right, a demand on him to do it, but it actually shows him up as someone that doesn't know who he's talking about. Because if you can't defend your thing, then what happens is the loudest voices end up rising to the top. And if there's no one to put the counter argument across, then all of these people that come up with all of these crazy things, or even the people that are telling the truth but are on the other side of it, they're the ones that are going to be hurt the most. So it doesn't do anyone any good.
Right.
Also, I think having both sides, the correct side and the wrong side, battling out, I think there's a nice nuance there that we can get in between and see the
Well,
interplay.
and I hesitate to say correct side and wrong side
Well,
because,
yes,
you know, we do have our preferred ideological things, and somewhere in the middle, oftentimes the truth there lies. And
yeah,
some of the studies have shown that, yeah, sure, the COVID vaccine did do the honors of making it less severe if you got COVID.
hmm,
It's obviously, and it is bloody obvious from all the data now, that it did nothing to stop transmission.
yeah,
And that was the lie that got people so pissed off at the start. You told us we had to get this virus, so it was get this virus. Wow, get get this vaccine, so it would stop transmission. But then we knew it didn't do that. So
right. And
that's
that
what
was
got
that
people pissed
that
off,
was the
is the lie.
pretense for everything.
Yeah,
Yeah,
is the lie that was promulgated, and not necessarily by scientists per se, but by a lot of media folks. So this is like science and media translation thing, because I think of like Rachel
right.
Maddow.
Bureaucrats.
Yeah.
Bureaucrats that were the communications teams for these things, people in political positions that were using the studies and
Mhm.
and stuff like this.
But I don't want to dwell too much longer, just because I think it's like an hour and a half before your own stream. So
I need to go eat. But yes.
let me close this down here a little bit, and then we can have some closing remarks, because
Mm,
that is my kind of that has been my distinct concern with these inclusivity style guides, is that what is it doing to mask actually getting at the truth? And I'm sorry, but people's feelings are not there. And also, what is the point of a liberal education if not to if not to push folks to not treat people based upon stereotypes? This is why
yeah.
the implicit bias tests have no predictive power when it
Mm,
comes to behavior, is because we do actually have an education system, and we do actually have cultural norms that indicates that treating people based upon stereotypes is a bad thing, so you shouldn't do it. And so you're trained to act against your worst impulses.
yeah. I don't know. I mean, the question, that should always be asked is who benefits from this, and it surely isn't science or the public. And so one can only deduce that this is an appeasement for an ideological goal. There's literally nothing more that can be pulled from that. It does nothing but complicate things further. It's like, I mean, the equivalent of coming up with a brand new language tomorrow and saying everything has to be rewritten in this brand new language that no one knows because the person who wrote it is really upset that their language isn't used.
Yeah.
That it's the same principle. And if that sounds absurd, then this should equally sound absurd.
Yeah, it definitely should. And if anybody in the chat has questions, feel free to ask, because I
Mm.
mean, that's the kind of closing thing. And I forgot to say at the beginning that you could ask whatever you'd like. So
Yes, please quiz us or drop them in the comments if you're watching on the replay as well.
exactly, yeah, definitely. But yeah, I don't know where it goes from here. And I mean, I think I do of course want to end with the idea of how the hell do we how the hell do we push back on all this crazy crap? Um,
Right.
because I mean, part of me thinks that, just in terms of the translation with studies and media and that whole thing, is that there needs to be some kind of training for just general public to, how do you read a study, how do you find a study, how do you identify the source of funding for the study, which is another thing, and those kinds of things. But then also, you know how do you find things like this, but also how do you push back if you're in the scientific world, and push
Mm.
back on all of these things, because like there's accreditation issues with universities, which
Yeah,
accreditation is a bad thing.
yeah,
Because you can force in stuff like this. Well, you're not doing these programs over here, so we're going to deny you that nice accreditation. which leads to all other things that you can get. But
Mhm.
so I guess that's where the concluding remarks can go, is like kinds of things to address the problem like that.
I think just like, I mean, this is a hydra of many heads, and it's not. I know that today we're focusing on the scientific, you know, field and everything, but this goes down to the crux of the manipulation of language and completely bastardizing what it is that we know, and that is intentional. I mean, I keep bringing it back to Derrida, but it's a very postmodern tactic to do these things, looking at words and how they can be used and how they can be changed for certain ends. And then you mix kind of Foucault back into things with the idea of the power structures. And then, of course, you have the Marxian aspect of the things, where it is done to stimulate some kind of uprising. And when you've got all of those different, and I know it sounds hyperbolic, but when you have all of these different ingredients in there, you end up with a situation like this. And I think it starts off with the media. And I think it starts off with some grip on media literacy. Because if you understand that, if you're reading something and it says, for example, red meat's bad for you, well, if you know not to take it on face value and go, "Oh, that's interesting. That's the narrative they're pushing. Let me read a little bit more. Let me do my own research on this, the immortal words." And they go and do it, and they should look at who funds the research for this stuff. Then they should actually look and try and source the paper that information derived from. Once they do that, they can start looking at the language that's being used. And so there's so much stuff that they can do, but I do think that, as what I teach people when I do, sort of creative consultancy or brand consultancy with people, is what is the touch points for your brand, right? Where does your clientele or your customers or anything, where do they start their journey? What is their journey through your brand, and where do they end up? And when I kind of apply that to this situation, well, where they consume stuff, the point of consumption is media. And so you kind of have to address the nutrients factor of that consumption. Once they do that, they can kind of look back and look at the other stuff, because the scientific papers, all good and well for journalists or scientists or people, academics that look, but the general Joe public, they don't ever see a scientific study or a paper, but they do see the end results of it when it's taken as is without any kind of thing. So I think media literacy will be the first initial stepping stone, I think.
Yeah, and to build on that, because the whole thing is, right now you still have the filtration of media with whatever scientific pubs there are, and all this kind of stuff with inclusivity style guides then feeds into that. But we're also going to have more and more, I see it all the time, is more and more journals are moving to be open access. And
Mm.
so those articles suddenly, yeah, you may still have the filtration of the media, and perhaps you and probably will, but the the other thing that will happen is, of course, when they become open access, anybody can read them. Anybody can pick them up and read them. And so,
And a lot of people can be offended by them and put pressure on people to correct those offenses.
yeah, yeah. Or in the same vein, find some support for people. So I don't know how that's all going to unfold in that kind of environment that we're in, that all of a sudden science is going to be pressured to be not offensive, which is unhelpful.
Yeah, very, very unhelpful in the pursuit of anyone that wants to pursue objective reality and truth.
Which is the
And
primary purpose of science. I mean,
really, is it? I kind of got lost in the past couple of years.
oh yeah, yeah.
Um,
At least it's supposed to be. I hope the activists don't screw us over. But I think I left a comment somewhere on, I think it was Jordan Peterson talking to somebody about the about how he thinks STEM is screwed by the woke. Kieran, did you freeze?
oh, am I here?
You're frozen with your eyes closed, which is, oh, there you go.
Oh, it's very weird because yeah. Anyway, I'm back. I'm back. It didn't freeze on my end.
but no, Jordan Peterson was talking in an interview he did with somebody about how he thinks STEM is screwed by the imposition of the woke, just because they're not inherently political people, which is true. A lot of us in STEM are not. we
Yeah,
just focus on we just focus on figuring out what the truth is, and if you leave us alone, we're fine with that.
yeah.
But that's not what postmodernism does. Postmodernism doesn't leave anybody alone. But I made a point to say to him, it's like, I am sure as hell not going down without a fight.
Oh,
I
no, and
know
I
a lot of scientists who feel that way now are just like, this is crazy. We're not going down without a fight.
and I wonder whether in time, because that drive to pursue science and that spirit that you have with it, it ain't something that can be just extinguished. And I do wonder at some point whether there is going to be a big historical moment where there is a certain break and a fracture,
Yeah.
and there are going to be two different schools of thought with stuff. I
Yeah.
mean, there already is in theory, but actually definitive groupings.
There are two different schools of thoughts with things, but the postmodernists like to say it's all about power, but they
Right.
can't account for in history how a lot of hang on a second, how a lot thank you, Rick G. Don't go away yet. We're not done. Um but
That's him for saying, "Oh, I'm bored now."
but um, goodness, I lost my train of thought. It's gone.
You're
But
talking about power and
oh
how.
yeah, yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
what they cannot account for is in history, the only well, thank you. The only way this can be done is by way of humor, as you did today. Well, thank you. We appreciate that. We live to make
Yeah.
fun of these idiots.
But humor is a very disarming tactic. If you can make someone laugh, then I think that is a way of getting your points across. And yeah, humor can be a very, very effective Trojan horse for things, and
Yeah,
not in an insidious way, but in a
but
very
yeah,
effective.
what I was trying to say is that the postmodernists can't account for the history of science, which has been you have something that is established by like natural consensus, being that it's not forced down everybody's throats for some time, but then somebody over here who has very little power oftentimes does not come from the discipline in question they are questioning. um that didn't sound right, but but
I'll go with it.
finds something that is irrefutably true and starts to challenge what is the natural consensus of a discipline. That person over here, who's that like one germ of a person who at first, or maybe small group of people who figure this out, um, they have very little power within that discipline, but they have the truth. And ultimately, the truth does win out, and you have eventually the development of a new natural consensus in a discipline because of that. And so
Yeah,
you have periods in scientific history where there's like natural consensus. Oh, wait a second, there's this breakthrough thing that happens, or a series of breakthrough things that happen, and then all of a sudden, oh, we have a new natural consensus that builds up over time. This is actually in the history of climate science. For a long time,
mhm,
we thought there's no way in hell that humans could do anything to influence the natural world around them. We're not going to do anything to influence the climate, what have you. And then in the 1800s, there was a whole bunch of experiments that basically pretty definitively showed the opposite. So yeah, despite the hysteria around it, climate science is actually older than it looks. But but there is that kind of thing. All of those people who initially started those experiments and did that, they were not climatologists themselves. A
mm,
lot of them were engineers and physicists and other folks who were not specifically in that discipline. So that was my point to saying that postmodernists can't account for that. That
no,
somebody who has no power at all within the discipline suddenly puts forward a theory that gets recognized as being true. And that is because of the way Western science, well, science, not Western science, works, with it being, about peer review and challenging and critiquing and evidentiary, and over time figuring out what the truth actually is. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
sorry, that was a long-winded, wet and
No,
long-winded.
no, no, no. No, it's quite right. It's quite right. But yeah, postmodern is very one-dimensional, even though that everything they say is about seven-dimensional of just guff.
Indeed, indeed. But is there anything you want to plug as we wrap up, or
Yes.
actually I already plugged the Rumble and YouTube for you, but
So, anyone that knows, I've just launched Woke Screen. Now, Woke Screen is really, really exciting. So, it is going to be a one-stop shop for pretty much everything. Culture warriors, if you're an artist, if you're creative, if you want anything, resources, how to understand the woke and everything, head over there is wokescreen.com. Now, I am going to be having in about an hour and a half my celebration launch stream. And so, as a departure from regular processes, we are going to be doing that on YouTube. Reason being is because that is the only platform that I can link up and do the giveaway with. So head over there and have a look at the pinned comment with the terms and conditions of the giveaway. But I'll be doing giveaways. I'll be doing Q&A, so you can ask me anything on my views on anything about the website, about my views on the woke stuff, whatever. And also, I'll be doing a demo to walk you through exactly what the site has in store for you. But you've got to head over and you've got to join up first, which is wokescreen.com/join. You can join as a free member if you want to, and that's great. Or you can join up as a culture warrior for $20 a month or $216 a year, which works out $18 a month, and you get access to locals, the community call. We can have game nights. By the way, this is going on for a long plug, but we've got so much, and Adrian can attest to it because Adrian's been dutifully helping me
I've been
bug
breaking
test.
things.
You can breaking things. She's been like Captain Caveman going around my website, Captain Caveman, going crazy. But this is a joint effort of everybody involved with this, and so it's been really exciting. But head over and I'll tell you a lot more of it at 8 p.m. UK time and 3 p.m. Eastern. Head over.
2 p.m. Central Time for those in Central Time.
Yes. Yeah. I'm not being
All
very
righty, fabulous. No, I look forward to the launch stream later myself, and just enough time to get in some lunch and hopefully do some grocery shopping.
Yeah,
Maybe
I'm gonna have some dinner.
yeah, eat some food, right?
Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, I hope you all enjoyed. Thank you for coming by. If you're watching on the replay, thank you for watching. And I hope you go over and join up with Woke Screen too, because it's gonna be fun. And until next time, I am hoping on the next SciChat Saturday to get someone interesting in particular who's quite a rabble rouser, actually, in psychology. But
And it's not me for once.
no, it's not you. That's not you. I'm hoping to get on sometime in the near future Lee Jissom, who is a psychic rabble on Twitter, but he is a psychologist who is quite a rabble rouser with psychology. So,
That'll be fascinating.
but he is a live wire and a very interesting person. But talk about some of the issues going on in the world of psychology.
Well,
But
I'll
anyway,
definitely be there in the audience for that one. I can't wait.
I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful to get him on, but I gotta reach out to him yet. So this might be a first little public thing that, hey, Lee, if you're watching. But anyway, until next time, everybody, we hope you stay curious.
Bye all.